Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Ms. Bounds.
Salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Knox County Board of Education August 4th work session. Our regular session will be held in this room next Wednesday, August 11th, and will begin at 5 p.m. Tonight, I see Commissioner Randy Smith in the audience. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. I don't think we have any other elected officials. Thanks so much for being here. Our teachers have returned to school this week, and I just wanted to take a moment to welcome them back and thank them for their hard work on preparations for this school year, and students report back on Monday for a half day. That's on August 9th. So we're looking forward to having students back in the classrooms. Are there any requested changes to this work session agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? We have a motion by Mr. Watson, a second by Ms. Babb. Thank you. Mr. McMillan?
I object to approving the agenda.
Okay,
Would you like for me to speak on that, or?
certainly.
Okay. We've discussed mass thoroughly, I believe. We spent hours upon hours discussing this, and people want to talk about the CDC now. They changed their mind. They won't release the information, all the information that they have. I just think we'll go through it and talk about it tonight, and then we'll go through the very same thing next week. So I intend to vote against that, and it's my understanding that in order to approve it, they must have, or it must carry 5 positive votes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted people to know where I stood.
Okay.
You know, you can join me or you can throw rotten tomatoes at me, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. I'm not sure who had their light on first. Ms. Owen?
I was just going to ask if the objection is to the whole agenda or to a specific item.
Mr. McMillan, are you objecting to the whole agenda or a specific item on it's actually on next week's agenda? Is that your question, Ms. Owen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I object to that, but I don't see that we'll accomplish anything. What are you wanting to do, Ms. Owen? Just tell me straight out what you want to do.
I'm trying to determine whether your objection is to our entire agenda or to an item on the agenda.
Well, do you want to talk about mass tonight?
Well,
Just answer me that, yes or no.
Since we're not to that agenda item, I'm trying to determine whether the entire agenda.
No, but we usually approve the agenda, as you well know, at the front end.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to get to. We
So-
set the agenda for the evening, and we're about to do that.
Right. Since we're not looking at a consent agenda, maybe Mr. Dubler can help us with procedure, but I think we could object to that item when it comes up.
Mr. Dubler?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. The agenda for tonight includes 9 items. It sounds like Mr. McMillan is objecting to item 7, but to get into item 7 about particular items on the agenda for next week, I mean, that's not technically on the agenda for tonight, so, so the way I'm reading the agenda is, I mean, Mr. McMillan could object to item 7, or he could object to the whole agenda. And that's tonight's agenda, obviously. I mean, which is the only thing that you can vote on tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Watson? Okay. So basically, the agenda, or the motion that's on the floor is to approve the agenda for this evening, which includes discussion of next week's agenda.
Exactly.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed?
No.
Okay.
Let's
Okay.
have a roll call.
Okay, we can do a
Madam
roll call,
Chair.
that's fine. Okay, Ms. Satterfield, I'm sorry, Ms. Courtney.
Ms.
Can
Satterfield?
you tell me exactly what?
Yeah, so this
I
motion,
hear you, Mr. Mike, but I also want to talk about some of the stuff on the agenda, so that's why I'm going forward with the vote. But tell me can you do it?
so the roll call vote will be to approve this work session agenda only.
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Mr. Watson? Yes. Ms. Babb?
Yes.
Ms. Henderson? Ms. Bounds? Yes. Mr. McMillan?
No.
Ms. Christie? Ms. Horn?
Yes.
7 yes votes and 1 no vote.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, thank you. We'll get into a discussion later on regarding the agenda for August 11th. Okay, let's move to Superintendent Thomas's report for this evening. I'm sorry, I actually skipped the vision and mission spotlight. I'm sorry, Superintendent Thomas, I'll go back to that. We don't have a specific initiative or to highlight this evening, but I did want to take a moment to spotlight our mission statement, which was developed in conjunction with our current strategic plan to provide excellent and accessible learning opportunities that empower all students to realize their full potential. As this new school year begins, it is my sincerest hope that Knox County Schools continues to work toward the goals outlined in the strategic plan to ensure student access to advanced academic programs and CTE programs, to continue to review, evaluate, and strengthen special education services for students with disabilities, and to maintain and reinforce the KCS commitment to arts education. I know each of us feel strongly about our responsibility to ensure that all students have access to high-quality education by providing them with every opportunity to reach their fullest potential. So it is also my hope that everyone keeps in mind that each board member and staff member of Knox County Schools is putting forth their best efforts for children as we begin this 2021-22 school year. And with that, I'll refer to Superintendent Thomas for your report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a few updates for you this evening. I'll be brief. I'd like to begin by reminding everyone that fall semester begins on Monday, August 9th, which will be a half a day for students, and we're excited to have our students back in school, in class, in person on Monday. As our board members already know, KCS teachers reported to their buildings this week, and I'm very thankful for all the hard work they are doing to get ready for the upcoming school year. I would encourage our students and families to say thank you to their teachers, and this is a long list of thank yous, so bear with me. Their teachers, their counselors, their educational assistants, their nurses, their custodians, nutrition workers, bus drivers, security officers, principals, secretaries, and other staff. So it takes a whole lot of people to make our school system successful. So they deserve a big thank you for all the work that they're putting in this week to get ready for our students on Monday. Our mission of teaching and learning is so important, and all of our hardworking employees make it all possible. Also want to remind families and all Knox County residents to please be cautious when driving in school zones. As the new year begins, our law enforcement partners will be stepping up enforcement in school zones, so please slow down, avoid distractions, and be on the lookout for buses that are loading and unloading children. I would like to acknowledge the new class of school security officers who graduated from their training academy last week. These officers play an essential role in protecting our students and employees, and I'm very grateful for their services. In addition, last week's graduation ceremony was the last official function for Security Chief Gus Paducas. I want to thank Chief Paducas for his service to our district and wish him well in retirement. Also want to welcome our new chief. We've talked a lot about Chief Perriard, so Jason Perriard, and I look forward to working with him as he takes command, and I know you'll be excited to work with him and look forward to working with him. And Jason, we finally see you in person, so would you like to say something to the board, say a few words, or?
Board members, Superintendent, Chair, it's so exciting to be here. My wife Trish and I just got settled in. We're still on boxes, but we're really excited to be in Knoxville. And I'm just really excited to meeting with each and every one of you to discuss security and strategies for the future so that the students can be safe. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Chief Perriard's going to do an outstanding job for us. I know his heart is in the right place, and he has all the experience to back it up. So we're very fortunate that you're joining our Knox County family. So thank you, Jason, and to your wife and your child as well. Welcome to Knox County. Hopefully it won't continue to be as hot as it's been, so maybe it'll cool off here for fall. And then finally, I want to briefly recognize a former KCS student who competed at the Olympic Games this week. Wes Kitts is a graduate of Halls High School. He finished 8th in his weight category while setting a new American record in the snatch lift. Congratulations to Wes on representing KCS and East Tennessee in Tokyo. So really proud of Wes and his accomplishments. And Madam Chair, members of the board, this concludes my report. So please.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Yes, congratulations, and also welcome to Chief Perriard. So it's nice to hear some happy news like that. Okay, we'll move on to discuss the agenda for August 11th. Do we have questions on items and contracts 1 or 2? Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On item 1, are these new vehicles in addition to ones that we already have, or are they to replace vehicles that we already have in service?
Mr. Oakes, do you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, can you?
Yes. Are the vehicles in number 1 that are being purchased, are these additional vehicles or to replace vehicles that we are moving?
No, these are replacement vehicles. We're buying 9 and actually surplusing or trading in 10 for these 9.
Thank you. Ms. Watson? Sorry, Mr. Watson?
That's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Oakes, I know that this quote that we're potentially approving is from Murfreesboro. When we look to purchase vehicles, do we also look within the county of Knoxville, or do we have a preferred vendor that we look to, or how do we decide that?
We buy off of the state contract,
Okay.
and that's who the state contract is with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? All right, moving on to, oh, I'm sorry, Ms.
I came like, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to look at agenda item number 2. I know we had a meeting last week, but I do think it'll be just worthwhile, just a brief statement, like, when it's all said and done, what will Knox County look like in 4 years with this program in place? So just like an overview of the Next Gen Foundation, if you don't mind.
Okay, Dr. Reiser, would you like to take that?
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield.
So
Thank you, ma'am.
let me clarify my questions to make sure you understand.
Okay.
When we're done, I know the roadmap is 4 years from now, in a sense. What would our city and our county look like ideally if everything was implemented to fidelity and with greatness?
That's a good question, Ms. Satterfield. And so I think we have some beginning vision of what we think that could look like. But I think as Donna and Jane shared last week, I mean, it really is a process. So there's not an end in mind that says, hey, we'll look just like this. I think there's some key things we can look for, but really I think between now and Christmas and beyond, we'll start seeing a lot of those processes that involve business and the mayors and people like that, kind of really picturing what is it that we want it to look like. I think one of the most important things that we're excited about is developing that profile of a graduate that really helps us define. Sometimes in things like mission statements, you can have the, kids to have multiple choices to do whatever, blah, 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 but we really want to think about what does that look like? Like, what are the things that we want every freshman in high school, sophomore in high school, junior? So by the time they're seniors and they graduate, what characteristics are we looking for? What data points that they've achieved at certain levels? What experiences have they had? Those are kind of things that we want to make sure we define, and then backward plan from that across the board. So It'll look a little different, I think, potentially in every community, because some of the programming will be different and some of the options and some of the business partners and that sort of thing will be. But kind of if I were going to summarize it right now, I would say our goal is to have a robust advanced academic program and a robust CTE program in every one of our communities and high schools, so students can stay in their neighborhood and have that exposure. There'll be some things later on this evening in the Esser plan that I think there are some kind of more tangible deliverables that we think can be part of that process as we move on. But I think ultimately community involvement, elected official involvement, your all's involvement in painting what that vision is so that our students can succeed once they graduate.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate for anybody that might have missed the meeting last time. And then I would also just like to request frequent updates regarding the process of how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, I just want to say, because I think probably a lot of people don't pay attention to our workshops, but I've been on the school board for 3 years, and this is probably, I think, the most exciting thing we've been talking about since I've been on the school board, of really trying to get some direction. And I love the fact that we're getting an outside group to come in and help guide it, but the fact that it's not a cookie cutter program. It really is coming in and trying to figure out how to work with our schools, with our community, with our partners, and really making it customized to us. But I was very excited just because I think people talk about CTE all the time and academics and where kids are supposed to go, whether it's to college or straight into professions. And I think this really speaks to that and will really help guide us moving forward. So I just want to thank everybody that was involved with the work. I know, the executive team of Knox County Schools definitely was, but I'm really, really excited that we're working on this.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also wanted to echo the appreciation of the team, and I've not been on the school board 3 years, but I'm very excited about the potential here, and for the same reasons that Ms. Babb mentioned. Also love the fact that we're engaging the community to the degree that we are and bringing stakeholders to the table to help influence this vision for Knox County Schools moving forward. I think we're seeing that in the forward work, and we're also been seeing that in the Esser work. I think it speaks to the power of involving the community in these types of decisions. So thank you all for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Okay, moving on to 3 and 4. 5 or 6. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could someone speak to item 6 and talk about how the McNabb program is going to work with our schools? What schools will be served? What size population?
Ms. Cook, would you like to take
What's the impact
that
of number
one?
6?
For Dr. Reiswick?
Thank you, Ms. Horn. Thank you, Ms. Owen. I'll actually have Janice come up and speak maybe in more detail to it. But this is a life training skills group. So we do multiple things with McNabb. So this is a program particular for my understanding. Again, as Janice comes up, I'll let her speak to that more. But kind of early identification of students who may have been exhibiting at-risk behaviors in school. And so we would have a program by which we could work with those students and kind of in sessions to counsel. But Janice will be able to tell you a lot more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cook.
So this is a different contract than the usual contract that we talked about with McNabb. So this is life skills that they provide. I have a list. I'd have to go in and pull it up so I can get that to you. There's different schools that's in. This is a contract that we've had. It's been in place. This is not a new contract.
Right. I'm not looking for real granular specificity, just kind of generally.
So they go in and they work with students that, well, as Dr. Reiswick said, that have been identified that need additional supports, that at-risk kids, sometimes class activities.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions on 7 or 8? Ms. Owen, did you have a question? Okay. Okay. 9 or 10? 11, 12, or 13? Okay. Moving to board policies. And just for the sake of those watching, the board has gone through and discussed the board policies that are on our agenda previously, but are there any questions on either of the first 2 policies? Okay, C or D. Mr. Watson?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Thank sorry. Would you mind speaking to the reason for some of these policy changes relative to state law changes?
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Watson, all of the changes that have been recommended by our office have been due to recent changes in the law, which have occurred following the 2021 legislative session.
And specifically in relationship to policy C-250 and policy I-171, I know we're not there yet, but the question's the same. In the state statutes, both statutes have requested that school boards adopt language in policy to reflect those laws. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Owen?
Mr. Dupler, if you could also speak just a little bit to G280. I've had several questions from teachers that are concerned about the new definition of a teacher. And I know that's from legislation, but if you could speak to that just a bit to reassure them that we haven't just come up with that on our own.
Okay, Mr. Dupler?
So, yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Owen. Again, the change comes directly from a new law, and I think I can even tell you if I can get it blown up. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but get it blown up. So it's going to be codified under TCA 49-3-323, and that section talks about a definition of teachers, and that teachers must spend 50% or more of their time on instructing students in class. That was, again, straight out of that state law. And to be honest, it was mainly around a definition for the BEP purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Okay, any other questions on board policies? Mr. Watson?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought you were only referencing the first two. I do have a question around G470. It's really not a question. In our discussion in policy review, we talked about changing line 14 to not just make it male dominant, and that change was made to his or her, but also line 16, that change should also be made to where it's the principal or his or her designee. That change was dismissed.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions or comments on board policies? Okay, moving to grants. Questions on A? Okay, B or C? D or E? F or G? Okay, moving to contracts. Questions on D contract? We have one on there. Any questions? Okay, regular agenda items. Questions on A? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Thomas, I remember when we were passing the budget for this coming year, there was a substitute motion to look at this if funding allowed. Can you give a little bit of description about what's allowing us to do this now? And I think there's, your intent is even to go beyond what we were suggesting relative to that increase with bonuses. Can you just speak to that?
Okay, I'm sorry. With that, I
I'm
do
sorry.
have a hearing problem.
No, that's
and
okay.
Mask complicates that, so if you could please repeat it.
Sure. So it's
Right.
item A under regular agenda items, and we were and when we passed the budget back in whenever we did that for this coming school year, we had referenced the desire to increase by an additional 4%. Can you just speak to what's allowing us to do that, and also there's some additional steps being taken to offer bonuses as well to custodians? Can you just speak to that?
Right, and I think when the budget was approved, Mr. Watson, I believe, made the amendment that was approved, actually, that said if we received some additional revenue through BEP, that we would look at applying that additional revenue to 3 categories of employees: custodians, educational assistants, and school secretaries. And the problem with BEP was it remained constant throughout. We've already received our July final, and that didn't change. However, or the sales tax revenue that's coming in is actually really strong. We feel like that we do have a little bit of room within our budget, existing budget, to go ahead and make this change to provide the 4% to the categories I just mentioned, as well as give the incentive. I know Mr. Oakes and also Mr. McPherson, we talked about this, and I think there's been like almost like 70 vacancies, I think, with custodial positions. And certainly what we intend to do is maintain sanitation, cleanliness of our schools. So we're trying to do everything we can to really fill those vacancies. And we've had the same kind of issues with our educational assistants and in terms of vacancies. And then also, I know as far as the incentive goes, there are school nutrition workers vacancies there that incentive would go to. But we feel like we could cover this within our general purpose budget, but sales tax revenues continue to be really strong. If we had to go back and make an additional appropriation, we feel confident that the funds would be there to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a budgetary situation. And I know, everybody works hard, but we know that the folks in these categories, it's really been hard to try to fill positions. They work hard, and they certainly deserve, it's closer to a living wage. I'm not saying this will give you a living wage, but it's better than what it's been. So I don't know if there are additional questions. Mr. McPherson probably could address those, but I hope that answered your questions. Yes, sir. And thank you, by the way, for making that amendment to allow this to happen. So I know our folks will be very appreciative to the board.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, this is just a quick question, just from my knowledge, and it was probably from Mr. McPherson. Does something like this, do we have to do it back through county commission, or is this just within our purview to pass?
Thank you, Ms. Babb. If we were to technically go back and amend the budget, in other words, if we were to go back and say we want to increase revenue projections, and in order to do this, then yes, it would have to go back. What our plan is, though, is we went through and looked historically at dollars that close into fund balance or dollars that are saved through the personnel line items. We will use those at times to cover overages in other areas by the end of the year, if that happens. Historically, the trend looks like we could actually cover this in the existing budget through just savings in employee turnover. We've had so many vacancies, unfortunately, that we're not going to hire all these people all in one day, obviously. So there's no reason to believe there's not going to continue to be turnover. If at the end of the year, and we do this every year, if we see that the personnel line items have run over, we'll cover it through savings in other areas. If sufficient savings are not in other budgetary line items, then we would have reserves, as Mr. Thomas talked about, significant reserves resulting from sales tax revenue. So at that point, if we were to formally amend the budget, we would have to go back to county commission. The process that we're doing it here, though, would not require that at this point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So that means that if we approve this next week, principals could then go right ahead and hire based on that new approval.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. All right, any other questions on that one? Okay, items B and C were withdrawn. Moving to D. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just wanted to speak to why items B and C were withdrawn and replaced with item D. Following our meeting June 30th, when Superintendent Thomas in his board report announced what we would be doing related to COVID protocols for this coming school year, I reached out to Superintendent Thomas and Chief Kelly and Gary Dupler related to the implications of that at our April 14th meeting. The board had approved 5-4 to follow the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines. There was subsequent votes relating to sunsetting the masking policy, first on August the 1st and then in May. And so I had some confusion and started working with the superintendent and his team to try to understand what were the implications relative to that vote in April. So my attempt in item D was to combine B and C. The wording mandating Tennessee Department of Health guidelines in C actually came from Mr. Dupler. And my intent, I know Mr. McMillan talked about not wanting to talk about masks. I don't want to talk about the efficacy of masks. The specific item is discussion and possible action regarding the board and superintendent's authority concerning the implementation of public health protocols as it relates to the superintendent's KCS Connect 21-22 plan as approved on April the 14th. So that is my intent, is to have a discussion about what is our relative authority to COVID protocols as it relates to that vote, and any subsequent messaging that we're providing through KCS. Mr. Dupler, you had produced a memo to the board that describes some of your and the law department's opinion related to this issue. Is that something, is that attached to this agenda? And if not, when would that be available to be open to the public, that memo?
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Watson, it's my understanding it's not attached to the memo, but.
Attached to the agenda?
Correct.
Right.
Attached to the agenda, but any board member can make it available. I mean, it's his or her own choice.
Okay, so it could be made available at this point, should any board member choose to do that? Okay, so, Mr. Dupler, I've read the memo, and I appreciate all the work that you all did on that. Can you tell me when that work started to develop that memo in terms of sitting down and drafting that?
It started after you asked the question that's basically set out in item D.
Okay, and that question was produced sometime late last week, and so you all did a tremendous amount of work to get to that opinion at this point. So let me make sure I'm understanding the memo correctly, and I'm going to request that it get added to the agenda so the public can see the memo. Basically, from what I understand from the memo, Mr. Dupler, is that our vote on April the 14th, to follow the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines, that the superintendent, even today, could enact any of those. There was probably about 5 or 6 COVID protocols bullet pointed in that plan. He currently could enact any of those and has the authority to do that. But because the board sunset the policy related to masks, first at the April meeting and then subsequently at the May meeting, the board basically has taken away his authority to implement any type of face covering requirement for Knox County schools. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So there's a tremendous amount of confusion around this issue, and I'm certainly one of those that's confused. And I want to just point out a couple reasons why I'm confused, and I would like to try to get to some clarity. So on April the 16th, after that vote was made on April the 14th, the superintendent, via the KCS Connect page, sent out a message, and part of that message was, I also want to share an important update regarding the 21-22 school year. This week, the Board of Education approved a proposal to follow the Tennessee Department of Health's COVID-19 guidelines in the upcoming school year. An updated copy of those recommendations may be found here. Those recommendations are also attached to this agenda, and in that, those recommendations, it did speak about face coverings as well as 4 or 5 other different protocols. At that same meeting, we did agree to sunset the mask policy on at that point, August 1st. It subsequently changed in May. So when the superintendent sent that and notified the public that we would be following the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines, even as it pertains to masks, was he acting outside of his authority to do that?
Don't know that I can answer that question because that was at a different time. Obviously, other things have occurred since then.
I understand, but what you just answered previously was that the thing that has prevented the superintendent from implementing a mask requirement in Knox County schools is the fact that we sunset the policy. Well, we had sunset the policy that night. We had approved that.
For August the 1st.
Correct.
2021.
Right.
So it was still in effect at that time.
Right, but the plan that was also approved that night was not determined to take effect until after that. And even though we set the sunset at 2 months earlier, are you saying that the date of the sunset impacts his authority?
Yes.
So if we would have left it August 1st, then he would have the authority?
Yes, the policy would have still been in effect until August the 1st.
But this plan does not take effect until after August the 1st. That's my point that I'm making, is that the plan does not take effect until after August the 1st. The plan that was approved on April the 14th.
Okay.
So because that plan was approved to not take place until after the 14th, until the school year, and in that plan it referenced face coverings, whether it's May or August, the policy had agreed to be sunset. So how does that impact the plan that was also approved?
I think we're just taking, with all respect, I think you're taking things out of context. What happened was, and Bob Thomas can speak for himself, but Superintendent Thomas pushed out guidance based upon this Connect plan that was indeed approved April 14th of 2021. Then there was the immediate vote after that to sunset the policy as of August the 1st.
Right.
Then in May, there was the vote to sunset the policy even earlier, as of the end of the spring semester. And again, we didn't have all the information at that point.
Sure.
Because from going back and looking at the meetings, and I know you have too, the meetings show that we had incomplete information. There was still a limited state of emergency pushed out by the governor at that time. But however, by the end of May, that limited state of emergency expired with regard to school systems and was even strengthened as of the end of July of this year.
Superintendent Thomas, when you sent out that communication on April the 16th that referenced the plan for this coming school year, and we had already agreed to sunset the policy August 1, and that plan referenced face coverings, did you believe you were being contradictory because that plan referenced face coverings and it was published on the KCS website?
In addition to what the board approved on April 14th, the board approved by a majority vote that this guidance may change in several ways as the year progresses.
Sure.
Any guidance issued by the state would take precedence. In my mind, takes precedence means more important than what the previous thing was.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of following the guidelines, as Mr. Dupler stated, the emergency order was lifted at that point, and since that point in time, the governor has said he's not in favor of mandating face masks. I'm in favor of the recommendations made by the CDC, the Tennessee Department of Health, but they're recommendations. They're not requirements. It's not a mandate. The Commissioner of Health has said that she is not mandating masks. It's optional. It should be a family decision. Those are state officials. I also talked to a local official this afternoon, Mayor Jacobs. Mayor Jacobs says he is not in favor of mandating masks, and he supports what we're doing right now. So I don't know what difference it made, what I thought on April 14th. That's 4 months ago. And really, continuing to talk about April 14th to me is, pardon me, I think it's a waste of time since it's 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. So, you asked me the question. I've been told, and it's in writing, I don't have the authority. Right. That's the board's authority. If you want to implement and mandate masks, I would suggest you put it on your agenda for next week and you vote on it. If you want to give me the authority as far as face masks are concerned, then I'm going to go back to what the governor has recommended, that it's recommended, but it's not mandated. Commissioner of Health has said that. Our own local health director, prior to today, said that she was not mandating masks for the community and then turned around and mandated masks for schools or to make it a requirement. I don't understand that either. So, we're trying to have school. It's about school, and I want to have safety for our students. But again, we've heard what the governor has said, what the commissioner of education has said, what our mayor has said. The majority, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, you vote on it tonight or next week, board members, the majority of board members have said, we don't want to mandate face coverings. Now, if y'all change on that, hey, we will mandate face coverings. I mean, I'll be glad to do that. It's just whatever you want to tell me to do. So,
Thank you.
you know, I really don't understand why we're continuing to talk about April 14th when that's 4 months ago, and I'm sorry. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. I appreciate your frustration. I'm frustrated as well. This is out of the 9 times we've talked about this issue, this is the only time that I brought it up. And again, the only reason I brought it up is because of trying to understand the authority given to the superintendent and the board. And as Mr. Dupler said, this memo was not produced until the last 4 days to bring some clarity to that. Currently on the KCS Connect website, it says, as always, we will continue to consult with the Knox County Health Department and to review guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education and the Tennessee Department of Health. If circumstances related to COVID-19 change, we will respond promptly in a coordination with these agencies. Can you help me and the public understand what it means that we would respond promptly when it seems like there's limited authority at this point?
I think from my standpoint, what that means, if Governor Lee, as he did in the spring of, what was it, 20, I guess, when he mandated that schools close or said to close, we closed. If the governor says, hey, face coverings are required, and you know, Gary, Mr. Duper, you help me out on this if I'm wrong, then, you know, I think we would have to come back and say, hey, we're under governmental order at this point to require face masks, and that's what we do. Or if the Commissioner of Health has that authority, or you as a Board of Education have that authority, then in my mind, it changes based on those things. I mean,
I just have one final question. So, Mr. Dupler, at this point, no time through the pandemic has our governor, Mayor Jacobs, or the Tennessee Department of Health mandated masks. Is that correct?
That's incorrect as far as Mayor Jacobs. Mayor Jacobs had a mask mandate, not for
Well,
schools, but
was
had
it
a mask.
Mayor Jacobs had a mask mandate, or was it the Knox County Board of Health had a mandate?
Well, he lifted the mandate. I mean, you know, so it was a county mandate. But as far as the statement with regard to the governor and the Tennessee Department of Health, they've never mandated masks.
Right. So up until this point, it's been a local decision. I mean, I know we had authority, some authority to do that because of the emergency order, but at no point did Knox County schools have to issue a mask mandate. Is that correct?
So, yes, I mean, I think you've stated it correctly, which is the state of emergency allowed the board to mandate masks, which it did through a policy, yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been fielding phone calls from confused families for quite a while. And I reached out at the beginning of May and asked for some clarification about the word recommend. Because the recommendation from the CDC is a recommendation to us. They are recommending that all students have face coverings. They are recommending that people who are vaccinated wear face coverings. And so I had quite a lot of discussion with senior staff about the word recommend. And at the time, the website said optional. And that was not what we had voted on, and that was corrected, and I greatly appreciated that. But as we've gone on, what's been on the website and what has come out has changed, even though the recommendations are changing in the opposite direction. So what we've seen on the website went from recommended to optional, changed back to recommended, and the last thing I saw on the website said allowed. Now, I know that's just semantics, but for our families who are trying to determine whether their medically fragile students can be in our schools this year, there is a large difference between recommended and allowed. I think for our students who are determining whether they are to wear face masks, kids want to follow the rules. They want to know what the rules are. And if we can't tell them what the rules are, then that gives them issues in following them. And when we're saying we recommend that you do something, and then we say you're allowed to do something, that's just too different. And my issue is not with face coverings. My issue is not with face coverings at all. My issue is that this board voted on language that was in an opening plan. And that language said that we would follow the recommendations of the CDC and of the state, and that those recommendations could change as we went along. But the information that's going out to the media is saying that we will not do this for this year. Well, that doesn't say that we are going to adjust as necessary. That says anything but we are going to adjust as necessary. So when we adopted language in April, and I think it's important to go back and look at April, because that's what we agreed. And this board said, here's what we're going to do. Our families don't understand why that's not what we're going to do. And I actually had someone on my doorstep yesterday asking me for clarification of what we're going to do. And I told the person what we voted in April, and he said, I know what you voted in April. I want to know if you're going to do it. And that's what I'm hearing from lots of people. They are confused. They don't understand the difference in the information that's going out. They don't understand why the board has voted for something and then the information coming from the administration is different. If the guidelines were changing in that direction, I think they would understand. If the guidelines from the CDC and the state health department and local health department, if all of those guidelines were moving in that direction, it would make sense. But when the guidelines are moving in the opposite direction, and when they see that the numbers are moving in the opposite direction, they're very confused about what we're doing here. And I think we're in a pattern of going back and forth so much and not sticking to what we have voted on, that the public has gotten to a point where they expect us to go back and forth and not stick to what we voted on. And that's extremely problematic for me. So I would like for our board to stick with what we voted on. We never changed that vote. We voted in April to accept the language in the plan, and that hasn't changed. The language in the plan that we discussed in our meeting was following the recommendations of the state, and those recommendations were specific to health. We've had a lot of opinions from a lot of politicians, and a lot of politicians making different kinds of threats and different kinds of pleas on all kinds of things. Those aren't what we agreed to follow. If they give us a directive, then we would have to follow that. Until then, we have what we said we would do. And I'm not sure how any other change impacts that, because we never changed that vote. We voted for the opening plan. In May, when we started talking about rolling back the face mask policy and ending it sooner, I also had discussions to determine exactly what the administration was looking at doing. And at that time, I suggested making our opening plan retroactive for 2 months so that it would cover the summer. We didn't pass that. That still didn't change what we did vote for. This should have started August 1. So I'm really concerned that what we're voting for as a board is not what we are backing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Ms. Christie? Excuse me.
Okay, can I just say for the audience, it's going to be a long night, I think, and if we can just let all of our board members speak, and then when we have public forum too, if we can just let people speak and not keep interrupting, we can get through this meeting probably a lot faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Ms. Christie?
And I really don't have a lot to say. I feel like I've said most of what I needed to in May. I would like for Mr. Dupler just to speak to the enforcement, because there was also a piece in his memo about questions about legally enforcing the masks. And also, I'm looking at our reopening plan, and that's attached to the April agenda, and there's actually something in there about moving schools to red, and we know that we can't do that now. So, I mean, there were other things in place that, I guess, in my mind, this was related to the state of emergency we were under when we voted on, and a lot of those permissions were taken away.
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Christie. I'm not sure, Ms. Christie, are you talking about the fact that, that there's been question as far as the board's specific power to? Okay. So, you know, there's been discussion about a case that came out of Williamson County. And that Williamson County case was already discussed by the board. And I talked about it as well at a board meeting. And that case is not direct precedent. In other words, it doesn't directly affect Knox County because it's out of Williamson County, so it directly affects Williamson County. And it was dismissed on technical grounds, so it didn't really directly affect Williamson County schools either, but it had some language in there about whether or not local school boards have the authority to mandate masks. And the chancellor had gone through and looked at numerous state statutes that talk about the board's powers, and was looking for a specific statute because there's a rule in law called Dillon's Rule that says that local school boards and local governments only have the power that's granted to those entities by the state. So that's what the chancellor was looking at, and came to the conclusion that there was really only that general power that applied, which was the power to control the local education, the schools. So based upon that, that's why the chancellor came to the conclusion that school boards don't have that power. Now again, is that direct law? No, it's not. But it's certainly something to show that it's in question as to whether or not this board should be passing a mask mandate at all. And it's also, another big part of our memo was focused on the executive orders of the governor, and the fact that, and I think I've already mentioned it, was that the state of emergency has been lifted. Currently, the only state of emergency exists with regard to the SNAP program and the National and State Guard. So with all that together, our office's recommendation for the board would be not to institute a mask mandate, but ultimately it's up to this board to decide.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Ms. Owen, did you have a question directly to that? Mr. Watson, do you mind if she asks a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. In the judge's opinion after the dismissal of the Williamson County case, was it that he found that the board did not have authority, or did he not find anything to support the board having authority? It was my understanding that he found neither that the board had the authority or that they did not have the authority.
Let me double check that and I'll get back to you.
I know that's a lot of knots. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to point out that I brought this issue up to Mr. Thomas and Mr. Dupler and Ms. Cayley prior to the CDC adjusting any of their guidance. Again, my point in bringing it up was directly related to the vote. My understanding from board policy is that the majority of the board, a 5-4 vote, carries that vote. And Mr. Thomas, I completely respect, again, your frustration, but the reason I'm bringing this up and talking about it, I would not be talking about this if that vote was 4-5. I'm talking about it because the vote was 5-4, and my understanding from policy is that that the majority wins out in that vote. And so I went back and looked at, I literally watched every video between the early April meeting and the late May meeting relative to these issues. And there's much in there that I highlighted that tried to track that, and I'm certainly not going to bore the board with that. But there is one comment that I wanted to pull out and ask a question about. this is at the 5/12 meeting, so this is after the governor first adjusted his state of emergency. Toward the end of that meeting, at 3:31 in that meeting, I talked about the majority vote, policy B112, and that I would be passing on that mask change because of that reason. And then Mr. Dupler asked you, I said, and this is verbatim, has there been anything that has been made of our vote on April 14th that would make it moot, Mr. Dupler? And then you said, that is not an easy question because things have changed. Things have happened recently. But your question, has there been a legal mandate, as I understand it? Has there been something from a judge, something from the governor, something from the Tennessee Department of Health saying that schools must remove masks? There has not been that, but there has been consideration for this board to look at. It is not binding. And then I asked at this point, if we let our votes regarding the following Tennessee Department of Health guidelines for 21-22, referencing the vote that we had on April the 14th, and then sunsetting the mask policy on August 1 stand, are we acting outside of our authority legally? And you said, there is nothing legally at this point to restrict the board from following the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines for the 21-22 year or from changing the policy. And then at 3:40 in that meeting, and this is my last statement, Ms. Owen stated, so if this if this is approved, meaning the sunsetting of the policy that we were talking about at that time, the mask, the face covering, does that mean we have no plan for summer school? And then Ms. Horn said, Mr. Dupler, does that mean that there would be no face covering policy for the summer? And Mr. Dupler said, as I understand it, is the superintendent has a plan for the fall, so you referenced he has a plan for that, and that was voted on. And if you sunset this policy, then Ms. Owens said, what Ms. Owens says is correct. There would be no plan and policy in effect for the summer. So if that is what, at that point, I know I voted under that guidance with sunsetting the policy earlier because you had made several statements in all those meetings to that effect, that he has a plan for the fall, but this affects the summer. So I know you're saying that you looked in this in great detail recently when I asked these questions, but when Superintendent Thomas referenced his plan, adjusted plan on 6/30, there had been no time from April 14th to 6/30 that the board had been told that the superintendent was not able to carry out the will of the board on that vote. Is that accurate?
You have to restate that question.
So the question is, and I referenced at one example that you had stated that there's nothing legally that would cause the vote on April 14th to be moot. And then the next thing, that was the last meeting we had on this issue. And that was toward the end of that meeting. That was May the 12th. And then the next thing that the board and the community hears in response to COVID protocols from the superintendent was announced on June the 30th. And there was no discussion with the board related to that ahead of time. It was just announced in the meeting. So what I'm asking is if the last guidance the board got when asked directly whether or not anything legally had changed to make that moot, and the answer was no, and then the superintendent acted differently than what was approved on April the 14th, why was the board not updated on that legal authority in those 2 months until I asked the question?
So I'm looking back at the minutes from the May meeting, and what it indicates is that there was nothing to offer legally about that point either way at that time. Again, we can't take these things out of context because at that time there still was a limited state of emergency declared by the governor. So, I mean, those statements were true at the time. And, and that state of emergency has since been lifted, certainly with regard to school systems.
But the first question I asked you this evening was, according to your memo, you said that it was the action of the board that removed that authority. So which was it? Is it both? Is it the state of emergency? Which one?
It is both, and, you know, since you're making my memorandum, and it's David Books as well, the Knox County Law Directors, and, you know, since you're making that, you know, part of the agenda, then, I mean, everyone can see that it's really a combination of all these things. I mean, you know, it's state action, it's, you know, the questions raised by that particular court, and questions that may be raised by other courts,
Yep.
and it certainly is actions by this board as well.
Thank you. Mr. Dupler, I really appreciate you digging into it. And that's part of the reason for me to bring this conversation, is because I think the public needs to hear this conversation. Because as Ms. Owen stated, there is a lot of confusion. Some people love the direction, some people hate the direction, and to me, that's not the point of either. It's they need to understand the direction. And if the law department is telling the superintendent and the school board that, hey, your authority has been adjusted, that needs to be made plainly clear to the public. So that's, again, why I want the memo to be included in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
No.
And I'll point out, well, go
Sorry.
ahead, Mr. Dupler.
May I, Madam Chair? I'm
Sure.
sorry. Ms. Owen had asked about the language from the Williamson County case. And to me, it's just best I have a copy of it, so I'll just read that section of it. It's just one sentence. The court cannot find, as a matter of law, defendants have acted within the authority given to them by the legislature when enacting face covering requirements.
Okay, so they could not find that they had acted with authority, but they also did not state that they found they acted outside of their authority? It just says they could not confirm that they acted within their authority.
The way I read that is that the chancellor was saying that could not find the authority, could not find it in the law.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Mr. Watson, I would just add that you were asking Superintendent Thomas whether he was concerned about the guidance given to him by the board. On June 30, when he presented his plans to us, there were no questions or objections to that from this board. So I would assume that he felt like that we were all on the same page. I would assume, since there were no questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Horn. I appreciate you bringing that up. I actually referenced that when I spoke to, Mr. Thomas was out of town, but I emailed him, Mr. Thomas and Ms. Kelly and Mr. Dupler following that. And I said, out of deference for him, I did not bring it up that night because I didn't want to challenge him, not having been briefed on it. Mr. Thomas and I often talk, and I always try to help him understand where I'm going with my questions in advance. And I didn't bring it up that night out of respect for him.
Okay, but he also brought it up on July 14th and said the same thing. So I feel like we had several times when he informed us that we did not object.
I
So
appreciate that.
that's my opinion.
I appreciate that. I tried really hard to handle this in private.
Okay.
And the last time that Mr. Dupler and Mr. Thomas and I met, which was late last week, in that conversation, we had agreed to bring it to the agenda because of the confusion. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from Ms. Babb, please.
Yeah, and I appreciate Ms. Owen and Mr. Watson's concerns, and it has been brought to my attention that maybe I have said things in April, and what did I really mean in April? And I'm going to say right now, in April, we were under one circumstance, May we're in a different circumstance, and times have changed. And what I think really, when I look at things and I look at the crowd of people that are here and the emails that I've gotten, nobody is saying, what did you mean on April 14th? What people are wanting to know right now is, where are we going with masks? And please don't start clapping when we're there, they're hooting or hollering. But I want to bring to it what people, I know why y'all are here. And I think this is where I hate to say it, I think this is getting very off track. People want to know, we're starting school next week, and Mr. Thomas has come out with the plan, and now people are questioning it and wanting to know if it's going to change. And what people need to understand is there are a lot of different forces that are coming into this. There is not one simple answer, and I'll tell you from the emails I've gotten, if anybody thinks it is a majority rules on this, it's literally like every other email, it's a different opinion. And we are getting different opinions, and Ms. Owen and Mr. Watson keep harking back to Tennessee Health Department. From my understanding, they might have come out with something new, but they have not come out with mask mandates. So if we're going to go back to the health department and Tennessee Health Department, they're not mandating them. We're also getting different guidance from our local health board. We're getting different guidance from our county mayor. We're getting different guidance from our governor, and everyone else. And really, to me, that's the crux of the thing. I really don't care about our meeting in April. As much as y'all want to talk about it, I don't care anymore. I really don't. I want to care about what I think the people here are wanting to talk about, which is how are we starting school? And we're not making a vote tonight, but I will say I don't see this personally as a time for mandates. But where I do see things is I want to strongly recommend people to wear masks, especially if they feel like they should. And people should feel comfortable wearing a mask, whether it's a teacher or a student. And I do want the language to change in that way, and that is one thing Ms. Owen was talking about. I think we need to be very strong in that language. We see that people are recommending it. Physicians group are recommending it. CDC, different groups are doing it. They're recommending it. Mandates, I just don't see holding a lot of weight in our community. And so I would have a hard time being behind a mandate. But I do want our language from Knox County Schools to be, we highly recommend it. We highly support anybody that wants to wear one to wear one. And I had one other, and while I'm at it, I wish people would get their damn vaccine, because honestly, that's why our community is in so much trouble right now. And that is what just literally, okay, once again, that's what eats me up at night, is the fact that if people back in May had gone and gotten their vaccination, we wouldn't be having their conversation right now. And there are going to be people that disagree with that, but if still the majority of people would have done it, we'd be in a different place. And so, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, but that's my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. We're going to go to, I think Ms. Owens' light was on next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the place where we are off track is in not hearing what the issue actually is. This isn't an issue about what our guidelines are. This is an issue of our board voting and that vote not mattering. This is an issue of whether we are going to vote and stand by it, or whether we're going to vote and do what we have seen boards a long time ago do. Just go back and say, that's all right, never mind, we didn't really, that's fine. We've literally seen superintendents, not recent superintendents, let me be very clear, but we have seen superintendents long ago literally do something illegal, and the board come back and retroactively vote and make it all okay. If we aren't going to stand by what we vote to do, if we aren't going to say we voted and then stand by it, then we're headed down that same path. And I know that many of us are here because we knew that path was a very wrong path. This isn't about mandates. I don't think anybody has said we need to mandate anything. I don't see any proposal on our agenda that suggests mandating anything. What I see is a question of why what we voted on isn't being carried through. And if what we voted on couldn't be carried through, either we should have been told that then, or we should have been told that in a subsequent meeting so that we could make an adjustment. But that never happened. We voted to give the superintendent the authority to consult with whomever he needs to at the state health department, the CDC, or local health authorities, I believe we're also in there, to make decisions as the year goes along. That's what we voted on. That's the language that should be out there. But when we say we are definitely not doing this for the whole year, that's not the same thing as what we voted on. It doesn't matter what it was. It doesn't matter if we voted to wear pink shoes. It doesn't matter. But what we voted on needs to be what we stand by, especially when we have never voted otherwise. That's the only thing that I'm asking. I think it's the only thing Mr. Watson's asking, is that we want the board's vote to matter. Because if it doesn't, there's no reason for us.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a comment about Ms. Babb's remarks, but since Ms. Owen said what she said, I would just like to know, what do you want to do? You said you all didn't want to talk about math. Well, these people are here because they want to talk about math. Do you want, if it's optional, now the superintendent can talk to anybody he wants to, confer with any state person or national person for that matter. That doesn't mean that he has the authority to, or he desires to want to carry through with whatever they tell him. You agree with that?
What I agree with is the language that we voted on.
What language is that? That's what I want to know.
It's the
Do you
language
want-
that we have read
what do you want
multiple
to do?
times, and I'm going to answer your question when you stop yelling at me.
Okay, answer it.
The language was to follow the recommendations of the CDC, and that state guidance would override that. That's the language that we voted on. Now, the recommendations of the CDC may change, and we all know that, and we discussed that. So if we say that we're going to follow recommendations, we have given our superintendent the latitude to make adjustments that he needs to. Maybe the situation gets a lot worse. Maybe the situation gets a lot better. But we voted to give him the latitude to do what needs to be done, just like we do with weather, just like we do with the flu. We voted that our superintendent could adjust that as we go along. But the language that has come out to the press is that we are doing specific this for the whole year, which is not what we voted. We voted for our superintendent to have
Okay.
the latitude to
Okay.
make those adjustments as we can.
But if you're going to sink or swim with the CDC, I'm, in
I'm
case
not-
you haven't noticed, they bounce like a rubber ball. There's a lot of disagreement about them. If we're going to, we would look like
If I'm going to
idiots.
swim with a rubber ball, then I'm probably going to have a good chance.
Well,
So,
whatever. If you
I'm
want to
not-
believe,
I'm
if you
not
want to believe
sinking or
in that,
swimming
whatever
with
you want to
anyone.
believe in. But right now, as you said, people want to know what the expectations are.
I do too.
Well,
That's what I'm
okay.
asking. I
If
want
you-
to know.
I'm about to tell you. Is there anything illegal or immoral or otherwise that they cannot, if they wish to wear masks to school, they can wear them?
We're not talking
If
about
they don't
masks.
want to, they don't have to,
We're not
because
talking
there's
about
not a mandate.
We're not even talking about masks. We're talking about following the vote that we took. That's all that matters.
So
Okay,
you're a
perhaps-
little more worried about the vote we took 4 months ago than you are us opening school.
I'm worried about this board. You've asked me a question, so I can either answer it or not.
Go ahead.
I'm concerned about this board's authority and whether we have any. Because what I'm seeing is that we don't, because the vote that we took is not being upheld.
So you're
it's-
worried about credibility.
Yes, I'm worried about the credibility of this body.
Okay.
And I think that's important. It's not about a mask. It's not about anything except the fact that what we voted for is not what we have. So
But-
yes, I want us to be credible.
30 days from now, you could go to Walmart and stop the first 10 people. Do you think you would find one that would remember anything about what we did as far as credibility?
I might not find any who know what we're doing now. But
That's true.
The point
That's
is
true.
that once our credibility starts to degrade,
That's a problem.
I don't think we're gonna be judged on whatever we did April the 12th or whenever it was.
Whether I'm
I just don't
judged or
think that.
not, I prefer to be honest about what I'm doing, whether anybody knows it or not.
Okay, thank you.
Wait a minute, I'm not through.
Okay, go ahead, Mr.
I'm sorry. As far as if people wear masks out of choice or otherwise, in reference to, Ms. Babb said she wanted them to be comfortable. I don't think there is such thing as being comfortable with a mask personally, sitting in a classroom. I mean, over a period of time. It might be comfortable for a few minutes, but I don't think, and I saw a doctor talk about, more than one, talk about if they were doing, surgery or something, they had to wear a mask. And even though it became uncomfortable in a matter of minutes, they had to do whatever the surgery required, 45 minutes to an hour, they had to put up with that. But the average person, according to this doctor, he said the average person is not going to find anything that they're comfortable with, and the average masks that we use are mostly ineffective, especially if you're walking, you're using energy, burning energy, and you're gonna, it's gonna work.
That's why I think we're actually agreeing, Mike, that that I don't want to mandate anybody, but I think there are a lot of people out there that would like their children to wear a mask in school, and I want them to be able to, and I want them to feel respected on that choice. And to be honest, once again, I don't really care what one doctor's opinion is. I think it's, once again, this is where, I think we're having differing opinions from authorities, and I think as a school board, we can totally support what people feel like is right for their children to do. And for a lot of those parents, it would be wearing a mask. For some of those parents, it's not wearing a mask. As we all saw in our emails, it's very split. So it's not for me to decide what your child is most comfortable with. I can't tell if a child is comfortable with a mask on, and I don't think that's in my purview to sort of dictate.
Nor for me to decide, but since you made the comment about you wanted people to be comfortable with the mask, I thought you.
Feel comfortable that they're not ridiculed, that they're not made fun of. That's what I mean about comfortable, like that they're not.
Okay, well, that wasn't.
I think we have got to respect what's going on in our community.
I thought you were talking about
just the actual
physically comfortable. And, we can sit here and argue and talk for, 3 hours. But the way it sits right now, people could wear, if you want your child to wear a mask, let them wear a mask. If you want your child not to, then so be it. The parent could decide. From all the information I can read, they say that the younger kids, that the masks do not do any good on them, that they suffer more. A lot of doctors think or medical people think they suffer more from trying to be forced to wear masks in a classroom than they would with whatever exposure they get. That's all I wanted to say, was just that why can't we just decide to open school and let them have a choice and forget about all this of who was right and who was wrong? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. I would agree. I think the timing on this conversation is not good timing, because the staff needs to get school open. Parents need to worry about getting their students ready to go back to school. If we need to have a procedural meeting, we can add that to our work session in September for our retreat. I think we need to focus on, if anybody's paying attention to the T and Ready scores, we need to be focusing on academics. So I would suggest that be what we focus on, and that we come back to a procedural issue if we have a problem. So that would be my suggestion. I would agree with the board members who have said that parents have full authority to ask their child to wear a mask when they go to school if they choose to. And I feel like our principals and our teachers are professionals, and they will do a great job encouraging students to wear a mask if they feel like they want to. I have full assurance that our educators are professional enough to do that in their classrooms and in their schools. I have no doubt. So that would be my comment, and we'll go to Mr. Watson. And
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will be my last comment on this matter. I do appreciate your comments around the procedural nature of this. To Ms. Owens' point about simply trying to understand the impact of a vote for the board, as an example, if you take item A on this agenda, which talks about increasing salary at 4% for custodial educational assistant school secretaries, my guess is that vote's probably going to approve next week. Obviously can't tell the future on that. But let's say it does get approved, and then we find out in 3 months that the superintendent actually gave a $2,000 bonus instead of a $1,000 bonus to each person. My guess is there would be other people on this board that would have some concern about that. Not that we didn't want to give more money, but because it didn't seem to follow the vote that we made. And so what I would ask, from what I understand from the law department, is things have changed. But what I am very clear about is that the board has not been updated about those changes proactively relative to that vote. And I would ask in the future, as a voting member of this body, that any vote that we make that says we're going to take a certain action, if things change that impact that vote, I would ask the law department and/or the central administration to let the board know proactively what those changes are. Again, this is not an item that I wanted to bring up. I spoke quite a bit in the spring about how many times we had talked about this particular item, and I can tell you the reason why I voted in April and in May the way that I did is so we didn't continue to bring this up. And as I told Mr. Dupler and Mr. Thomas earlier this week, if the board truly does not have, if the superintendent and/or board truly does not have authority in this matter, then I would drop it. But that was something that was not known to me until I asked the question 2.5 months after the vote. So I would ask in the future that we're proactively notified if the implications of our vote and the situations and the relative authority change, that we're made aware of that. And we shouldn't have to ask for that information. I can't ask if my authority has changed unless the people who know about the situations related to that authority make it known.
okay, thank you, Mr. Watson. Mr. Thomas?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to say a few words here of what I've heard from the standpoint, basically making me feel like my integrity is being questioned in terms of carrying out the will of the board. And I've spent, not in this position 48 years, but 48 years in this school district trying to carry out the will of the board, trying to help our employees, trying to improve the situation for our employees, trying to provide the very best educational opportunities for our students. We went to summer school in the month of June, part of July. We operated under what we're operating under right now, and there was not one single question about it. I'm a little bit confused about where I have not complied with what the board wanted to do. And quite frankly, I resent that. Person doesn't have much, but their integrity. I guess I just don't understand that because the board, approved any guidance issued by the state would take precedence. Does that not tell me I have the latitude if it changes, that we change the plan? And hey, I should have been questioned. I apologize to Mr. Watson for not putting in a board update what I was going to say. But I find this quite upsetting. So you just need to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, I just wanted to address that, and I respect that. I mean, in all the conversations that we've had, correct me if I'm wrong, I've mentioned to you, this for me is not about you and the actions that you've taken. You admitted to me earlier today when we spoke that you have also been confused through this process. And I don't fault you for that. I'm confused. There's been a number of different votes. There's been a number of different actions. There's been a number of different stakeholders, including the governor and the mayor and all those types of things that have weighed in. I don't think you acted outside of what you knew to be the appropriate action. All I'm asking for is that as the law department and/or administration understands that the board and/or the superintendent's authority has shifted, that we just be made known that. I've not seen that ever happen on this board in the year that I've served so far. I don't think it's a precedent, and I appreciate, and as I told you before, appreciate you making note of that in terms of letting us know before that. And you know, Superintendent Thomas, I never have privately, and I'm not publicly questioning your integrity. I'm simply asking for a little bit more communication as the authority of the board and/or superintendent adjust. So I respect you too much to question your authority or your integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree, Mr. Watson, and Mr. Thomas, your integrity is exactly why this is confusing for us, because my goal was to find out where this is being changed. What is going on that's causing us to not have the information that we need and not be able to get it? It's not a question of your integrity. I'm questioning the integrity and the future integrity of this board. It is not a question of yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Mr. Dupler, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like we need to on behalf of our office because I think Ms. Babb said it best, which is COVID has been an issue which has been ever evolving since March of 2020. And, you know, things have changed and there's been a lot of moving parts from many different forms of government, whether it's national, state, local, or otherwise. So, you know, it's been hard to get a handle on. And if anybody's been confused, then, you know, a lot of people have been confused. And frankly, we do appreciate Mr. Watson asking us to do this memo because it did give us a chance to take a good researched look at the situation and give the best response possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Okay, we have one final topic on our agenda, and that is the framework for the Esser 3.0 application to the Department of Education. Mr. Thomas, would you like to just talk about that first, or should?
I know Dr. Reiswick's prepared to go through the information for you, but I'd just like to say before John does that I want to express my appreciation to John and his team and Cheryl Martin. They have worked extremely hard to get all this information together, and they've done it under circumstances that are not the most ideal when the timeline that we've been asked to do all this. So John and his team have done an excellent job. The board did have an opportunity to hear from Ford last week, and as Ms. Babb mentioned, it was one of the most refreshing conversations that we've had in some time. And you know, if you can't get excited about what we talked about last week, I just don't believe you can get excited. So John, if it's okay, Madam Chair, just turn it over to Dr. Reiswick and dazzle us with your efforts to spend $114 million and to provide opportunities for our students to get them caught up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Thomas, and for the board members who've already heard this, it's not dazzling. they may be asleep before it's over. So I do want to echo what Mr. Thomas said, and he's been part of this process as well. And pretty much everybody here you see from Knox County Schools has been part of that, either on a committee or a subcommittee. As he also mentioned, you know, the timeline has been very tight with this, and kind of the guidance we've gotten from the state throughout the process. And they're only doing as well as they can to get information from the feds. And we understand that, you know, the federal government's trying to get this money out as quick as they can to schools to make an impact. And Ms. Horn alluded to earlier, you know, I know the data is still under embargo, but our kind of first look at the data of the impact of the pandemic is definitely something that we want to get these things into effect as quick as we can. So I will try to go quick, but also try to be somewhat thorough to help explain kind of where we are with this. So,
And Dr. Reiswick, I'll just let the public know and anyone watching that this is attached to the agenda. So if you want to look at it at home or at your table, it is attached to the agenda also.
all right, thank you very much, appreciate that. So I'll start just with this. As you all know, and I think Mr. Watson alluded to earlier in the meeting today, there is a pretty robust stakeholder process for this to take place. And so I'll get into some of that in a minute, but I wanted to also speak to Laura Oncolade, who was one of our facilitators who works with NIET, who came in and was a third party who helped with this process. When we thought about what was required from the state and the feds to get the level of stakeholder engagement that was required, we really didn't have that expertise with school getting ready to start and coming out of the pandemic, so we did have someone from the outside come and help with that process. And we'll talk through some of that in a second, but also just wanted to talk about how we got to this statement. Laura, besides just working with communities and stakeholder input, she also worked with our executive team. So she was bringing stakeholder information as it was still open and coming to us. Ms. Martin, who again gets a lot of credit as our federal programs director, was working through the state side of certain documents and questions that we had to answer around a needs assessment, as well as the rest of us. So bringing both of those documents together, she spent two sessions with the district's executive team. And as we kind of did a process through with her, these were the things that really came out to us from looking at those documents. So again, you can read, but I'll read this one to you. Knox County will strategically use the Esser 3.0 funds so that all students across all schools and all student groups will have access to the continuing support and tools needed to thrive in grade level instruction and to enable them for success post-graduation. And you know, that is important for us. That's been important for us the last couple years to not just think about getting kids across the line for graduation, but are they prepared for that life after? I heard this said the other day, and I like the way that it was said, to enroll, enlist, or be employed. Those are all acceptable for us if they're ready to do those things. So that's important. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so I think the other part of this, the ESSER funds, will provide us an opportunity to accelerate our progress in alignment with our strategic mission. And again, the superintendent has spoken to this. You'll see that come through in this as well. I want to take a second and kind of talk about some points of emphasis that we've heard this week and kind of thinking through things as we go into this plan. The first is one actually Commissioner Swin said in a webinar we did this week. And I really like this, and I think it's important as you frame your thinking around this. But it says you cannot outwork a pandemic, and that was evident from what we have seen. And I think this is a good perspective for us as data will start becoming public and we think about that. So the 2021 student achievement data that we're going to receive is going to show a decline. We know that. It's pretty much across the board. It's the same for the state and same for what we're going to see in Knox County. So we want to just be clear just in stating this, that these data are not a reflection of the effort of our teachers or our school leaders. Instead, it's a reflection of the disruption that students face throughout the year and the challenges. And just wanted to lay out what some of those were just so everybody kind of grasps that, because you know, typically we look at data and we start trying to do this kind of deep dive into root cause and figure those kinds of things out. We'll continue to do that, but we also want to understand a lot of this was around student absenteeism this year, and some of that was around sickness and some of it was around quarantine. You know, when you think about if you're a student, even a student who achieves well, and you're in a class for the beginning of a concept, a math concept, and then you're disrupted for 10 days while the teacher's continuing to go on, and you may have 2 days to get on virtual and kind of try to figure that out but not be able to ask questions. So even high functioning students who have always done well really struggle with that. Students who had at-risk behaviors and not at-risk behaviors but at-risk academic performance, we're challenged even more in that. So that's not an effort issue, that's not a student, family, or teacher effort issue. That's just what, the things that are caused by the pandemic. We saw the same with teachers. A teacher's teaching has their lesson plans laid out for 10 days, and then all of a sudden it's disrupted for a positive COVID test. And now I have to go home. I have to try to figure out how to get onto my class through Canvas and log that. Even though we did training, even though we did those kinds of things, it's still not the same. Periodic school closures, we saw that happen this year. Even in our district, we were able to stay open with Mr. Thomas's leadership. But at the same time, there were some schools that closed in that. And then also the learning curve of virtual. I mean, our teachers did a great job embracing that. But there were a lot of new apps and a lot of new tools, and we got intuitive and a lot smarter at that, and our spring was better than our fall. But all those, again, are challenges when we talk about that you can't outwork a pandemic. It wasn't for lack of effort, and we just want to make sure that that's clear. We also know in the second part, at a minimum, and I think this is important for us to state, prediction would be 3 to 5 years before we may get back to where we were pre-COVID. Now, we hope that's not the case, and we really do, and that's going to lead to, Shannon Jackson said this week, and I thought this was good, the third point. The KCS has to have a sense of urgency to teach, lead, and support students like our hair's on fire for the next 5 years, and I think that's totally true. And that was something as we talked about in an exec team, and she said that well. So, you know, it may not bear out, and it's going to be hard to compare 18-19 data with the data we're going to see, and it's going to be hard to compare next year's data with, you know, I think this is a good thought too. Right now, everyone's expecting this. We're going to see this data, and we're going to kind of go, okay, we had a pandemic last year. Well, next year, the numbers may not be they may be better, improving and moving in that way, but they may not be back to where they were, but we won't, hopefully, have the urgency around coming into a pandemic, and it's easy to forget when you get out from there that some of this impact on kids who might be in the second grade, and they may still be feeling some of these effects by fourth grade. So we just have to know it's a long game to get there, but we will get there for sure. So just want to set that up. Whoops, wrong way again. And then this is just what we believe. We do think our staff, our teachers, leaders, parents of Knox County have the heart and determination to get this job done, and we do realize that our students' future depends on this. So we're excited about it. So I say all that to say, as we get into this plan, there's a couple things we'll look at. First is we know with these dollars, we have to focus both on immediate needs, which are the next 12 to 24 months, but we also need to look at the next 3 to 5 years, because $114 million doesn't come every year. You know, that's kind of decades. You might get that kind of money at a given time. So trying to balance, and I'm going to show some places where that's happened. We'll go into more strategies in a second. But we try to balance this across both. When you look at some of our strategies, and again, I'll go into more detail where these fit in our priorities in a second, but some immediate strategies we have in this plan, you're going to see some tutoring models that will impact students, we hope. I say immediately, it may be more spring of 2022 because there's a recruitment and training process that has to happen for that, but we think that's a more immediate reaction to the gaps. Creating transition programs for our 6th grade and 9th graders. We've done some things called Summer Bridge and that sort of stuff so that students have additional time in summer to do catch up. That's an immediate response. You'll see a lot of things in this plan about better data tracking. We do that now, but we haven't been able to be as intentional about that and know what sources we're looking at to make those decisions. There's a lot of this will be built on capacity building in the school to be able to make those day-to-day instructional decisions as teachers and coaches work through that. And then also offer incentives for teachers to utilize planning periods to support students in, oops, sorry, that one's in the wrong place. That's actually one of our tutoring strategies. I'll talk about that in a second. So long-term strategies are also in this. We're talking about growing reading specialists, another strategy we're excited about. That may take 12 to 18 months to do, so that's something that maybe yield, we think, past the 5 years, but it's something that we could do, again, that's not going to happen immediately. Our Grow Your Own program, looking at expanding that to like a historic black college or university. That's a strategy that, again, we won't yield that fruit in the first semester of that. Develop fast-track paths for effective math tutors to become math teachers, and we think we can build a system out for that, but they may be a year 3 strategy in these Esser dollars. And then also one is to establish CTE programming pathways at every school that could be community-based to serve, community-facing to serve the community in which they exist. So those are just some examples of, you'll see some some immediate and some long-term focus on those. We also have a good balance in our strategies, we think, on everything being research-based, but we also don't have all the answers. It's not just follow all these steps and you'll get there. There's space for innovation in these strategies, and we really believe we have the school leaders and teachers to help us figure this out. So some examples of our research-based strategy, high-dosage tutoring is one that's really probably the best known strategy right now that most of the country is looking at. Train and support reading specialists, as we mentioned before, provide students with mental health supports, monitor student course taking and strengthen the CTE offerings and their schedules as they go through their career with us. Creation of dashboards for effective decision making and communication with families. Those are all very much research based, but within those we see some space for innovation. As I said before, 3 different models of tutoring. We're going to follow those with the REA team, see which ones are yielding the most fruit. And the great thing about these 3 years is it can be rewritten or revised as we go along. So if there are things we see to be higher yield strategies, there are things we can scale up. If ones aren't bearing fruit, we can shut those down and move forward. So create new strategies for our teacher pipeline, additional intervention materials, we're talking about in some areas for that. and expansion of teacher leadership roles. These are all things that we think we don't have fully defined, but we think we'll be able to define those as we move forward. So just giving you that on the overview as you look into it. So the ESSER planning process, so I'm going to give you, I'll try to run through this quick and I won't read all the bullet points. If you look at that third bullet point, that's speaking to the overall dollars awarded through ESSER 3.0, just roughly over 14 million. But the truth is, when you look at the bullet points under that, $1 million of those dollars go to our charter school, Emerald Academy. 14.3 million of those dollars will come off the top as indirect cost. That's common in a grant that there's a direct indirect cost amount. That goes into our general purpose budget, and I know Ron can speak more to that, but typically that's in there. We know some of these things, we try to build some dollars up in reserves for, you know, when these dollars go away and use them for some other projects like that. So if you're asking, you know that the real spend on this is about 98.7 million. That's still a whole lot of money. It's not 114, but just so you know where that's at. And then these funds have to be exhausted by September 24th, which is different of, September of 2024, which is different than they have to be allocated. They have to actually be spent by then. So that's another thing. So as Mr. Thomas spoke, there's a lot of parameters around this, that being one of those, as opposed to being able to see if we can stretch this further and further. We do have an end date when that is as far as we can go. Okay. So some specific requirements that the district has to meet when allocating this money. We're required to use at least 20% of that to address learning loss. There are additional pieces the state has kind of incentivized to be able to use up to 50% of that for learning loss. And some of those things, by doing that, would be some of the tutoring programs the state has. There's some other planning support, some ongoing implementation supports. Let me say this, like we think the state has a good plan. We also understand we're the third largest district in the state. So there are some places where we are still in conversation with the state that we haven't just accepted everything that fits us and we're going to take it. So there are some, like around tutoring, they have some different restrictions on that based on their ratios and that sort of thing. And we're not sure that we can realistically cover all that. So we have some calls still ongoing with the State Department to make sure that we're still eligible for some of those things, but it shouldn't impact us that far. Okay, just again, some other housekeeping stuff. It's due by August the 27th, the final plan. So tonight, what you'll be looking at is our framework for how we're going to spend this, or how we plan to spend this. It won't have an exact budget with it because Cheryl and her team still have 2 more weeks to kind of get it in final format for what the state wants through an e-plan format that we have to submit to. But we will be bringing that back to the board once it's been applied with a full budget in. So what you'll see today when we go through the different priorities is we'll have a dollar amount allocated there. It may be 500,000 more or more or less, but it'll give you the general idea of what that is. It does talk about ESSER plans having meaningful public consultation, and there was a lot of that. I'll show you a shot of that in a second so you can see what that is, how that process worked. And then I'm actually going to show you that first. So this is what it looked like. So our stakeholder engagement, these were the opportunities, and again, Laura led this work for us from the outside. There was a stakeholder survey, and I'll speak to that in a second about how many recipients we had for that, or how many participants we had. Principal advisory was our principal focus group. We had an elementary teacher focus group, secondary. We had a family advisory council. We had 2 community meetings that were open for everyone to attend at Sarah Simpson. And then we had the district needs assessment planning sessions there, and then I think Laura was able to meet with most of you on one-on-one meetings kind of to run through that information as well. So I think a pretty robust process for that to happen. So some input on the stakeholder survey. So there were almost 14,000 of those surveys that were completed or that were opened. About 10,000 were totally completed. So what that might mean is someone may have only filled out a section of those other 3,000 in the difference. On the participant profile, this kind of gives you a breakdown of how people identify themselves who completed the survey. You could be in more than one group, so you could be a family member and also a teacher, so that's why those don't add up to 100%. But that gives you an idea of who filled out the survey that was part of that. I'm going to go back now and kind of say, so how do we get to the ESSER plan? So we take all of that and again, Laura helped do this, which was nice having a third party involved in that. So we take the stakeholder engagement, then that needs assessment that we talked about is really aligned to questions that the state set up on data. And the questions were things like how many students were in virtual training, how many were virtual last year, how many were in person, how many, like they'll ask us a lot of those kinds of questions that drive the data for us to form this needs assessment. Then once we had that, we're able to take some data that we had and kind of dive down into root causes. And when we had those root causes, we went back with the stakeholder information, and again, Laura was instrumental in doing this, and paired those up to kind of come up with what bubbled to the top as priorities that would fit in both of those. I will say this, there were some good ideas from the stakeholders that just aren't allowable in Esser. So we were aware of that. I mean, we had lots of good conversations around some things that might be stuff we'd consider for general purpose or a grant or something in the future. They're just not allowable based on, they had to be kind of caused by COVID. And so some of those questions we would have, I remember sitting in a group that I facilitated at one of the community meetings, and someone shared something for about 20 minutes. And at the end of that, I said, well, was that, caused by COVID? And they're like, no, but I still want to spend the money there. I get it. I mean, that's a great idea. We wrote the idea down and put it in there, but it probably wouldn't be allowable in Esser. All right, I'm going to skip to here. These were some of the trends from the participants around the state priorities. So the state kind of blocked it into four different, or some different priorities, and these were kind of what we heard around these areas that were kind of the lead parts. Under academics, and again, I think you'll see a lot of this when we talk about our strategies. Additional tutoring programs, interventionists to work with students, early reading trainings and supports, the need for a clear set of instructional priorities. It's interesting that bubbled up because we sensed some of that too. Student readiness, the mental health supports, not a surprise. A lot around additional high school and middle school supports and programs. We heard that again, which was kind of nice because two different sets of focus group, but I think you heard from the Ford, their involvement with the community and focus groups, that was something that bubbled up too. So hearing that again. Educators around that, and again, that's not from our educators. That is a subject group in the survey and in the process around educators. And so class size reduction was one that was high up there. Support for new teachers through mentoring, focused teacher diversity strategy, additional leadership opportunities for teacher collaborative planning. So you'll see a lot of those. I will say this about class reduction, and Laura put together, and I think you all got a copy of that, the stakeholder input. I just remember on class size reduction, there was some thought around the other factor in this is that fiscal cliff that we hit in 3 years. So, if you invest a lot of dollars and hire, 250 teachers, that's potentially 250 teachers you have to lay off in 3 years. And as those conversations happen in the focus groups, because she took the information from the survey to have that, a lot of people were like, well, that's not what we want to do. A lot of families, so I think people understood there's a trade-off in some of that. As you make those decisions. On foundational elements, again, this is talking more about technology investments. We heard a lot around that, making sure we continue to have classrooms that have technology. We've kind of turned the corner now where we do a lot of technology with the Chromebooks and that sort of thing. So we need to do that, and also to make sure our schools are healthy places to be. Here's some other things that came up that weren't necessarily, that kind of came out of the conversations, which we like, and we're embracing this too. So one was frequent progress reports on data and impact on needed changes. It's funny that Ms. Satterfield brought that up around Ford today too, so she was right in line with what we heard in the input. So so you'll hear lots of things where we're building in stuff. We'll say dashboards or data check, database decision making. Our ultimate goal is we don't want to just be the keepers of that at the district. We understand the magic happens at the building, right? To the extent that the leaders and the teachers can make those decisions and drive that on a day-to-day decision-making, that's where we want to be. We want to be supports to that. So there'll be some training for that as well. Equity across resources and programming, something else that we heard a lot of. And then ongoing stakeholder engagement. I mean, this was kind of a neat thing for us, and I know Mr. Thomas and I were talking last week, walking back over, like we may have found a process that kind of works. We got good input from the Ford side and from the Esser side, and I think we heard that from the community. That was a good kind of engagement that they liked. And obviously we can't do that every month on everything, but maybe on some big kind of strategic stuff, there may be a way to work with somebody to do some of those things. So something we'll continue to try to do. Stakeholders aligned, and this was across the board. So when we talk about this, Laura did a breakdown based on kind of all those that we saw, from teachers to parents to all those kinds of things. These kind of align. Again, I think you'll see these in the priorities. All this information went to the top. Elementary focus was really around K-2 literacy. That's where we make the difference before third grade. And the pandemic has seemed to have a higher negative effect on reading for those primary grades, and we know that's critical. That's a huge concern of ours moving forward, because it already was something we were trying to work on, with roughly 40% of our district proficient by third grade, and we'll probably see a step back for a little while. That's a concern for us. Middle school math, that 6-3 space. Algebra 1 really is kind of a gateway to push to say you're going to be ready for life after graduation. And that we understand we need to do more backward planning in that 6 to 9 area. Typically, kids who take algebra in 7th and 8th grade are usually, in better shape academically, but it's really those freshmen who take that sometimes we see that they may struggle to take higher math, which is kind of a gateway to a lot of opportunities. And also shows us sometimes some deficits in some other areas, but math will be our primary focus there. And then high school triaging our rising junior and seniors to increase grad rate. We already know our current rising sophomores, juniors, I have one of those, my daughter's a rising sophomore, that they, thank goodness she's not behind on credits. That would be good. But kids could be behind on credits there, and we understand that. So that's going to be something that we need to continue to focus on and provide opportunities for schools to be able to do what they need to do. And then all grade levels, the non-academic supports that we know are important for students to be able to learn. And again, we continue to talk about it in that frame. We know there are obstacles to learning, and sometimes they're social emotional or socioeconomic, those things. We need to address those so that kids can be successful. We continue to believe that the way out of a lot of tough situations is a better education. So that's important for us. All right, so here were the priorities. I'll run through these. You all probably don't believe me. I said I'll run through them quick. You heard them this week, and you're like, really? This is quick? I will try to be faster than I was when we talked through them earlier.
There's so much in them.
There's a lot. Yeah, there is a lot. And so let me say this. I'm glad that, so we've continued as a team, talking about everybody who's here working through these things, to understand, again, it's really easy to get $114 million and blow everything up across the board, right? But we understand everything we try to think about is it's only as good as it can be implemented at the school. And that's how much can that school leadership handle and how much can those teachers handle. So we've tried to be real thoughtful about all this won't be year one, semester one. Some of this will be over the course of the 3 years. We really are trying to get the message down to here are the 3 things every school needs to be working on in elementary. Here are the 3 things in middle school and high so that we can continue to do that. Now, we're not going to get that totally right, and we'll hear. Our leaders from the school will let us know when that's too much, and we'll need to adjust and do that. But we've really tried to be coherent and aligned to what we're asking them to do because we know it's only as much as they can do in their schools. So I'm going to jump in real quick on this one. So this first one is strengthen early foundational skills around literacy, really in that K2 window. We're thinking roughly $15 million over 3 years here. I'm going to try to hit the high points. One is we saw where we need clear instructional and proficiency outcomes, so we would want to set those up. Create a walkthrough tool that we're using across the board. One thing we've heard from our schools is we can't hear from 10 voices. We need the same kind of thing that's going on. So if we agree this is what K2 literacy instruction should look like, we need the supervisors who come from the district, we need our instructional coaches, we need our peers, we need our principals all on that same page. So we're talking about the same data and the same kind of outcome. So we'll work to build that. That's not one we're going to have right off the bat. We'll work to build it and then to be able to look in those classrooms and support teachers as they do that work. Moving down, we talk about, this is another one that's a little bit longer, but having a reading specialist in every elementary school. There's a couple ways we could do this. We think the quick way to do it, but probably not the long way to do it. The long game way to do this would be just to go buy 50 reading specialists, right? The problem with that is same thing with adding more staff. One, it becomes part of the general purpose, which is probably not likely to grow enormously over the next 3 years. And also, so we lose that if it's a good resource, but also this gives us a chance to build our own. So we're going to identify teachers that we currently have in the system that aren't additional FTEs or additional positions we have to add, work with a partner like UTK and build out a 12 to 18 month program so that we can build leaders within our current teaching force to become reading specialists and serve in their schools, and they might have to shift to other schools. That'll be a 3-year process running folks through that, but we hope to build them over time. The second is really going to talk about tutoring. It's under the 3rd bullet there, strategic deployment of resources. So this is the first model. In elementary school, what we're proposing is to, as we talk with principals, it's really hard to run tutoring part-time, and in our opinion, it can be hard to run tutors with like just college students or just people like that who are coming in from the outside. The most effective tutoring is tutoring that's aligned to the content and curriculum that students are learning in real time. Again, that's hard to have that coordination if you're not there in the building every day. And talking to some of our principals, our idea on this one is that we would hire tutors that would actually be deployed to schools that would work with those teachers. So where we see that looking in elementary is 150 tutors. That's not enough for everybody, so we'll have to figure out what schools are our top priority based on reading proficiency rates, potentially subgroup proficiency rates. We'll work with our REA team to know how we'll deploy those. And we really want them then, we want to give the principals some level of autonomy on where they assign them class period to class period. But it will be based on the data, and it will be in those K2 spaces, really trying to work on reading and increasing that. How does that look in a classroom? There's a couple things research says you can do with tutoring. One is you can extend the day. Two is you can extend the year. That's really, neither one of those are super popular options in Knox County with our families. For the ones who do like that, like we did our summer programming this year, they really liked it. And so for that 10 to 15%, we'll continue to do that. But when we offered 27,000 students this year and had less than 6,000 come, the 6,000 were really happy. But there's that 21 other thousand that we still need to do something with. So extending the day or the year is probably not an option for those families, and we hear that. So the other option is you maximize the time in the classroom on task. So we would assign a tutor. We would have the tutors trained in kind of the core things, the core interventions they might need for early literacy. That'll allow the teacher in that classroom, again, the data has shown these have the majority of students that need that kind of intervention for that class period, to either do a small group pull out for those kids around a certain skill, or vice versa. They could handle some of the large group while the teacher does some intervention in a smaller group. So very targeted, again, based on the data that we'll be using for that. Those tutors could move from school to school as schools improve in those. But again, we do know we have schools with higher needs that may need that, and some schools may be fine and make this come out of this in a lot faster situations. That's our elementary tutoring model. And then we have on the next one really trying to professional development and looking at some assessments. As you know, it's hard to tell if you're making progress in real time if you just wait for the end of the year to get that test result. So there are three types of assessment we'll be looking at across the board, K through 12. One is Ames Web that we've already been using for foundational skills in literacy. We'll continue to teach principals and teachers how to use that data to make day-to-day instructional materials. We're excited about Case 21. Our principals are excited as well. That's a formative assessment that we'll give 3 times a year that will be able to predict students' proficiency rates. It also has a pretty tight correlation right now to things like ACT prediction and that sort of stuff post-high school. Our goal, again, is we could pull it at the district level to see where we're seeing trends and grade levels that need supports, and that could become part of our district learning day trainings and our teaching and learning day trainings. But really the power for that's going to be the schools and the teachers to be able to look at that and kind of see. Because sometimes, having taught myself, you see sometimes you think this was covered and kids mastered it, you realize they don't, and you have to go back and reteach that. So right now we don't have a tool for them to see that kind of in real time and share that with their peers. And then the third, we do have some that are specific assessments that are aligned with our new benchmark advanced ELA curriculum and some other curriculum that we have as well that we'd be continuing to do that. So if schools are using more beyond that, we're fine with that. Some are really have certain ones that they've been using as part of their school culture. We're fine with that. But as far as a district, we're really going to try to support those 3 pieces of data so that we can make instructional decisions day to day. All right, the next one I'll go through even faster, I promise, is really very similar, but this one is more the math focus for middle school. So you're going to see some redundant strategies here. I'll call out some of the different ones. The first one's back to the walkthrough tool to really look at what we need in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade math, and being intentional about that. So 6th grade math looks the same at Gresham Middle School as it does at Farragut Middle School. Like, we have those same kind of ideas of what we're trying to do. If again, our ultimate goal, back to the Ford conversation last week, is to produce this kind of graduate across the board, no matter zip code or any other factors, then we're going to have to get some figured out how to do those across the board and provide those supports in different places. So I think this helps us do that. I'm going to move down to the strategic deployment of resources, because this is going to show let's see, which one was that, 4th bullet down? Yeah. That's going to show what our middle school tutoring model would be. This one's a little different. Our goal in this one would be to hire 100 tutors and deploy 6 of those to every middle school, so that schools could look at their math outcomes, and then the principal could assign based on that. Again, we train them in basic math strategies and how they could go about doing that. So this would be one. We feel like there's enough need across the board in our middle schools and the size of schools at different places that we could provide those tutors in every one. Again, they'd be part of that principal staff. We'd be training them on deployment and where to strategically put them based on the data that they have. So you see, this is where our model could be a little different than the state model. We're talking about 250 hires that we would have to have for 3 years for these tutors. We really just don't think our market will allow us to hire more than that right now. I mean, if we really wanted to scale up to get to 1-to-3 ratios across the board for every kid, we're probably talking 600-700 tutors. I don't think we can bring them on in the way that we're talking about inclusion and pushing them into classrooms and do that. Now, we might be able to cobble that together by pulling part-time college students and retired people and that sort of thing. But based on the model we're looking for to be very focused in what we're doing, we don't think that would necessarily play out for us that way. Now, again, reserving this. This is brand new. If we get into year one and we can't get over 50 tutors to come, we may make modifications to that as we go out. But right now, this is our plan that we feel comfortable with, and I think principals have felt comfortable with as we've had those conversations as well. We're moving down to the last one on attract, recruit, and retain highly effective middle school math and algebra teachers. The first part of this is we know every year, because math hires are hard to make, there's not a lot of folks out there doing that. We know we have a large group that are new every year. Identify our math teachers who are already really good in that space, offer them a stipend to be mentors to the new teachers who are coming on board in math. What we've seen in the past is what you hope to do. Good teachers can get there in 2 or 3 years to be highly impactful to students, but with a mentor, sometimes you can accelerate that impact, and in about a year to a year and a half, they can be performing at the level they would if they were kind of left on their own for 3 years. So our hope is to be able to replicate and mimic some of those things and really turn our new teachers into high-powered teachers early on. And then the last strategy on here, I think, is another one that's probably a year 2 or 3 out. If we have tutors that are doing a great job in that math space and they meet some of the requirements, we'd like to tap them to go in to be math teachers for us and work with an EPP, an educational prep program. We are our own now for CTE, and math may be a little more challenging, but it's something we could potentially look at with the state down the road, but we could work with our other partners to look at that too, so kind of tap people. We know there's going to be a shortage in years out. We know there's a shortage now, so we'd like to look at that. Area 3 is going to talk a lot about what we did around Ford last week around career advising, academic supports, portrait of a graduate, what a ready graduate looks like. So here's some neat strategies in this one. If we look under the first one, as we talked last week, it kind of that very first bullet point talks about building scope and sequence and an intentional plan around the technical programs, advanced academic programs at every high school. Like, that doesn't sound like a lot, but like that could be a really cool thing for us as a district to be able to say every school in every neighborhood has advanced academics and robust CTE. And by that, we're talking about industry partners aligned, workforce development for our region, and programs that really matter. And I'm not saying our current programs don't, but as we tighten and make those really happen the way they could, I think that could be a source of pride for every community. So in order to do that, you'll see phases 4 and 5 for the forward work in here. I think Ms. Horn said that for us last week. Our partners at Knox Ed Foundation, and Chris has been a good part of that too, have agreed to do phases 2 and 3 of that plan, and then we'd pick up 3 and 4 in Esser. I'll say this, the great thing about Ford is this, they do help with that process. They don't have a program, as they said yesterday or last week, but at the end of this, they kind of fade away. Like after you've gone through step 5, they're not looking for like another 10-year commitment to go into phase 6 through 10. This is their process at 5. So there is an ability to stay in the network, and I think it's a fairly low price to do that, so you can continue to do visits and things. But really, the building of this master plan and this work is a process that fits really nicely into something like Esser that we think will be toward the end of that and have our master plan by that time. So we're encouraged by that. The next strategy down talks about, my print's much smaller than it is up there, talks about expanding work-based learning opportunities for each high school. This is where we're talking about a community-based approach to CTE program. This was actually, I'll give Keith and Danny credit for this one. They were part of this process, really thinking about what did students lose out in during COVID. And part of that was students who did work-based learning, they couldn't go out last year. So we lost a lot of those opportunities for them to be out there if they were in that career, in a career path, which made them think, which was a great idea, we had kids even prior to COVID who didn't have transportation and couldn't go out and do those kinds of things, and that might have been a limiting factor for them. So the idea on this one is that we put dollars into facilities. We're saying kind of earmarking like $500,000 per site, and principals who are listening, you're not getting a check for $500,000. All right, I just want to say that. $500,000 per site approximately that would go to facilities, and then as they go through the forward work and determine one of their programs that they would like to make community facing. An example might be like a cosmetology program. These dollars could be used to build out like a reception area, all those kinds of things so that they could actually serve the community. So if I'm a student who needs work-based learning opportunities, I could do that without having to leave campus. South Oil High School has done a great job of that right now. They're running their marketing program, is running their school shop and their school store and those sorts of things. So it's those kinds of experiences, again, everything's not going to cost $500,000. Some may cost $100,000. Some may cost $600,000. But it's just a way for we could put money back in that to try to build that out. So we're excited about that one. We'll move down to, boy, I should have made this bigger. My wife, she's not watching it, but she would think this is funny because she wears glasses and I don't now. All right, so then we'll move down to the next one that is going to talk about, and this is, and I'll tell you guys where there are extra positions that are added. As we build out our college and career, it says checkpoints for grades 6 through 12. We talked about this a little bit again last week. We want to have an intentional plan. We talked about we've gone to Catholic and Webb and kind of seen, you know, your freshman year, everyone does this. You put this in your file, you have these experiences. We want to start that for all of our 6 through 12 students so that they have similar experiences. They switch schools, they still have this file that kind of follows them and experiences that they need to get that done. So with this would be an additional position. We're proposing 32 college and career counselors, 1 for middle school and 1 for high school. So again, eyes wide open. I think they're going to love it at the schools. So that may be something in 3 years that we either have to think about in a different way if it becomes part of what we do, or it could even be something we do just to get this up and lifted and see what that number, and maybe it's just the high schools like. We don't know for sure, but we are going to need some people to help us lead that work in the coming years. And there's also, we mentioned before, transitions to 6th and 9th grade, which would be an expansion of our summer bridge program with students who are behind, and then also expanding our credit recovery. So we kind of have our credit recovery the way we always do it. I know Danny and his secondary team have some other ideas, and Shannon thinking about with the large number of kids that need more credits, there might be some other ways we can try some different things, and so we'll have some dollars set aside for that. The final part of this is really looking at our high school model. If you go down to review and analyze student course requests and that sort of thing. So a lot of this is data reporting. Aspen is our student information system, which most people in the public probably don't care, but they probably check their kids' grades on that. That's probably where they get it. But there's a lot more things that it does. If we're going to be good at tracking 6th through 12th graders, there's a lot of data points that we've got to pull together to put in usable files. And a lot of that's put throughout here. I haven't gone into that. Where we can dashboard that so schools can see it. We can make it outward facing for families to be able to see it. And that's a lot of work to do in the next 3 years. But this would be one of those places where we might have some dollars put aside for, we might have to build some reporting structures out in Aspen to be able to pull that data down. Also, I'll say this, our high school tutoring model in here is going to be different than middle and elementary. Number one, it's a lot harder to get tutors in high school because it's a lot more specialized. So it's hard to find a Latin tutor, right? Because the Latin teacher is usually the one who knows Latin. So our thought in this, again, working with Danny's department, is that we'll do allocations for dollars for time cards for schools over the next 3 years with a real focus on recovery credit. So we're going to give principals a lot of autonomy in that to help bring plans back to Danny and his team to approve. It could be that they pay a teacher to teach on their plan to tutor to help kids recover credit. It could be before or after school. We even had some people talk about like virtual math helplines. And we're willing to try that. Again, it's a space we don't know, and we want to see what's best to have there. And we really have faith in our schools that they'll come up with some good strategies to be able to do that. But again, focus more toward recovery credits and credits where students are behind. The next is going to be around interventions to close academic gaps for students. I'm excited about the first strategy on this one for sure. Again, our thought in this is to build capacity in the school, kind of teach them to fish. They know how to fish a lot already, but some other kind of ways that we can do that. So one, Janice and her team will continue to build PIT teams or whole school support teams. And what that looks like in a school is they're kind of the first line of defense when they're seeing things pop up in their school. If it's a social emotional issue, if there are anxiety issues, if there are any of those kinds of things, there's a team that's trained that Janice's team has supported to be the first line of defense to look at that. And they can really make some of those determinations and then kind of call in her experts to help them if they see kids with a lot of anxiety that are getting reported. And it's not just the school counselors. It would have teachers, it would have administrators, social workers, all part of that process. Then they may get hold of Janice, and she may be able to send someone at their next place to do some trainings on how to help kids with anxiety. So we really see that as a piece in the school that could help us out down the road. There are other pieces of this one too. One is Janice has talked about consulting with an external consultant to help with some strategies around chronic absenteeism. And we know with students returning back, some students haven't been in school at all, especially in some schools. We're going to have more than that than others. They have a pretty good capacity, but some of this is brand new. So there's some groups she's been working with that she would like to continue to expand that. One that I know we're probably all excited about and schools will be excited about, expansion of Helen Ross McNabb individual student counseling support. That has been a great success for us and a great partnership for us. I think Cheryl can throw something at me if I'm wrong. I think it's roughly 3 million, 3 to 3.1 million will be the investment over 3 years to expand some of those services at our schools. Then there's one that says expand the bank of intervention supports and options, and this is really our RTI. We kind of have been with one curriculum or kind of one method to be able to get that done because we've kind of done it on a shoestring budget. Paula Sarver and her team do a great job with that, supporting our schools and doing those interventions. But we have some ideas that there might be some things that we could do better and we could experiment with to try to help kids who have fallen behind. I think that's a great idea for that one. And then Jason has listed a few things out around alternative assessment, working toward alternative academic diplomas for special ed students, and also expanding programs like Project Search, which is a transition from high school to, or from school to workforce, maybe have another site for that. So there's some strategies around that. He also has talked a lot about building data systems so they can track kids through those systems and the interventions that they're getting, so that we have a better way to communicate that and also be able to monitor that from the inside. So we think will be a good part of that as well. All right, 3 more. Sorry, 3 more. All right. This is, the next one is going to be building teacher and leader capacity to make instructional decisions. I want to make a note on this. You saw one of the priorities that rose up was about diverse recruiting and trying to diversify our staff. We had the initial run at this was a great one. Scott and Nate Langlos were a big part of that and kind of talking through lots of strategies. The problem was when we did our needs assessment and pulled back data, our lack of diversity in our teaching force was not a COVID issue, right? We kind of knew that existed before. So there are places where we think we can still work some strategies in, but to the extent we were going to hopefully go there, the needs assessment won't support that. But there are some neat things from this that I think will work. Oops, I'm on the total wrong one. That's a great setup for priority 6, sorry. Priority 5 is about building teacher and leader capacities at the school level, which is also a good one. This first one is really, as we've made the transition from team to this font is really small on my notes, sorry, is to provide training. So as we move in our evaluation system, in our instructional framework from team to Tiger, we really haven't had a focus on kind of that rubric and strategies around that. The last couple of years has kind of been like, oh, we've done that before. But there really is this sense that we can renew and get better at those strategies. And so the other thing we've done is mostly schools that have been Title I schools or schools that have been kind of in a certain status with the state. We've put a lot of supports there around the rubric. This will give us a chance to expand that to nearly every school. And so we've worked with organizations like Corwin or NIET that are kind of experts in those kinds. And what they do is they really talk about high yield strategies for grouping, high yield strategies for questioning for a teacher. And so we want to provide that across the board to help teachers in that. So that's part of this plan and as far as that goes. 2 around mentoring. The first one is we do believe in mentoring program. It rose as a need as well. So we'll have allocated dollars to every school so that they can build on their mentoring program for their new teachers, kind of acclimating them and building that out. We don't know exactly, again, how much that will be. It's probably not going to be tens of thousands of dollars. It's probably going to be more like thousands of dollars, but it's a start. We have a lot of schools and we need to really try to bring some of that back. We have schools that do that very well without dollars, but we think we need to try to put dollars into that to help them. There's also one here for onboarding new administrators. What we see and a need lots of times are to be instructional leaders. You can kind of learn the bus routes and the keys and all that kind of stuff, but really how do you lead instructionally? So our goal here would be to pair new administrators with mentors and have them attend the Standards Institute. So it's a great training that's put on around how to raise standards in a classroom and how to make instructional focus the top in your school. So that's one we think we do there. This one, the next one is the one I'm most excited about of everything that's in here. So this enhanced teacher leader supports. This is one that Keith and Shannon get credit for being the brainchild on this one as they look through this. This is really, we've under-tapped our teacher leaders in our schools. And so this is a chance when you think about department chairs. I mean, our typical department chairs, usually that's more of a high school thing. They kind of top out at around $700. For a long time, they were kind of book inventory people, and they'd send those reports back every year. Keith and Shannon have really worked with a team of teachers and administrators prior to this, and it seemed like it fit really well to really build out this new leadership opportunity that will be a $2,500 stipend a year for these roles. And it's not just for high schools. Elementary schools never had this. Middle schools had it, but it's been a little looser. So our goal would be $2,500 a year stipend. They're annual, so if a principal decides they want to rotate a different person every year, or if a person says, you know, I want out because my life situation's changed, that's fine. You know, it's just that, it's that $2,500 stipend. But what would be focused on in elementary school, there'd be 6, encore reading, math, science, STEM, social studies, student supports. Same thing in middle school, same thing in high school, except you add CTE because that's there. What we see these folks doing is being, the supervisors can speak directly to these folks as kind of that person in their building who's the quote-unquote expert. We think, one, that gives teachers an opportunity to have that kind of exposure behind the curtain and part of that process. With that, we'd expect them to be the same people who would lead some of our district trainings and our district work as we do those kinds of things. And then also, we think it's going to be helpful for the principal. So now you have other people who are in the know in your building who can help on that leadership team and have really kind of a direct line to a supervisor and inform. In no way are we working around the principal on this. It's just a chance to build capacity and spread that out across the school. So I think that one could yield some great results for us. And really, we were all sitting around one day and we were kind of talking about our path as we were talking about pipelines, and almost every one of us had been a department chair at some point in our process. And we're like, oh yeah, that's kind of where we got the first look at master scheduling and kind of leading a group toward a goal and doing those kinds of things. So we thought that could be a great way for us to continue to recognize teacher leaders and maybe have a pipeline for future on that. All right, now everything I said about the last one is now applies. So these are going to be around those recruitment strategies. So the first one here really kind of comes down to do a climate assessment. This would take a third party with an external partner for us to look at some schools, for a look at an inclusive culture. So here's the way, and Scott, if I butcher this, correct me. So you can bring in diverse talent, but if you don't have the if you're not ready to receive that, lots of times it comes and goes in 2 years, right? And it's hard to keep that. So this would be an idea that we would be able to, and it may pilot in at first some schools to start off, but we would look at that and have someone come and look at us from the outside, that here are areas you could improve, areas you could build that out. Because what we do know, again, it's not just pay. You know, it's inclusiveness to a community. It's the community values that. We're even talking in our minds, those of you who've done leadership and also like an experience like that where you can kind of start thinking about, you know, talk to the mayors, talk to someone from RNL, UT, like see that this is a welcoming place and a place to fit. What we need you to do and want you to do and want you to be part of our community. But we need to know that and take a look at ourselves to see where we need to improve on that. So that's part of that as a retention strategy. We mentioned before a potential to do a grow your own. We do that with UTK right now, and grow your own, for folks who may not know that, is identification early on, either of like educational assistants who have potential to be teachers. We're doing a grow your own program that will start next year for Central, Austin East, and Fulton high schools who all have flagship scholarships at UT. If we can identify those seniors in high school that want to be teachers, we can put them into a program like that. Their schools, you know, basically pay for it. They keep their GPA up. We'd mentor and bring them back to come work for us. That's a grow your own opportunity. Same kind of thing here. We would just like to create something like that with a historic black college or university so that we're, again, being serious about our recruitment of diversity and building our diversity there. The last two on this one are, number one, this is an example where I think we may have gotten better from last year. So it says build a cadre of full-time subs for each school, and we go, wait a minute, we did that last year. You know, we tried to hire 20 full-time subs at the district level during COVID. We had a lot of factors there. Number one, there was COVID, right? Number two, there's not a connection to the district like there is to a school. So our strategy in this one is if we can have, and again, I have to look at budget as it tightens down to where we get. It may be A, it may be 2, it may be based on need of a school that doesn't have a high fill rate. If we can put a position or positions in a school that have a low sub fill rate and make that person, this is where they report every day. What we know, first of all, is usually a sub's needed every day. But if a sub's not, then they can help out in classrooms, they can help out with tutoring, they can help out with all the kind of different things that happen. But again, we know if you're part of that, you're going to the Friday night football game or the after-school kids, something there, I'm part of that staff then, as opposed to getting a call, no offense, Scott, from HR who's on the other line saying, this is a school you're going to today and this is a school you're going to tomorrow. So we think this could be an improvement on a strategy that we've tried before. And then the last one on here, ATSI, TSI, and CSI are all initials that basically mean schools that fall into a category where one of their subgroups hits an underperforming level, usually bottom 5% in the state. We met with the state a few weeks ago. We have some schools that are on the watch list that won't be named till the end of this year, the year coming up. And what we've seen as an effective strategy is to move to like a 216 contract. Teachers are on 200-day contracts at those schools. What we like is, again, it will be a time limit before hopefully those schools will be off. what we want to do with that time is have those teachers work on professional development around what that strategy is. So they may come back a week earlier than most teachers and work with their staff if they're one of those schools that are identified, and we would give them a couple years of that. Two, it's a retention strategy because there's a little more pay for the days you work, but also a growth and development strategy for those schools. All right, last one, guys. So the last one is create safe and healthy learning environments. And let me say this first of all. Russ and Freddie and our ops team did a great job, and the list was much longer than this of things that could be approved. But they were great to say, again, what do we think with the money that's left in here, about $20 million, could have the best bang for academics for students moving forward. So again, there will be more coming from Russ, and if there's more funds coming from them, CNI endorses you should do it. Is that what I was supposed to say, Russ? No? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so the things that we're looking at, number one, and we saw this in the needs assessment, we saw this in the stakeholder, maintain technology investments. We have them, we need to continue to do it. The two areas here, again, working with Freddie Cox, Promethean panels, so you think about the smart boards have now been replaced where you don't need the projector, and the Prometheans now have it built in, and they're touch screens and all that. Our thought would be with these dollars, I think it's roughly about a $12.9 million price tag, 4,500 classrooms, replacing those. And then also document cameras would be as a tool lots of our folks have thought is useful, especially with Canvas and different virtual things. Roughly 4,500 of those, so we can outfit those in our classroom as standard operating for teachers to be able to use. And then there's also an investment in some IT, like ransomware support that with all the technology we're bringing in, we'd right into that. And then finally, one we're excited about that would address, we think, be a great boost for some of our students who have language barriers. Lincoln Park, if you're familiar with that space, has a wing that we currently can't occupy because it's not cleared for students to be able to be in. Needs an elevator and some different work. We've talked about this for years, so this could be really cool if we could pull this off, and I think we can with this money. But a Newcomers Academy. So we have the Welcome Center there now, so families who come to us with language barriers have really loved that. Schools have enjoyed having that so that they can take care of their enrollment, answer their questions, have translators on hand. The sad part of that is then they go to their base school, which is good, they're going to their base school, but we don't have that same level of service always there for students. When we've heard from principals, we've heard from teachers, that barrier lots of times is not the student's aptitude or academic ability, it's the language barrier. The Newcomer Center would allow us to have students there for 12, I think up to 18 months, we'll have to look at that. They could potentially receive some of their services and academic supports through Paul Kelly, or we could have them there as well, but we could give them kind of an immersion experience with their language to help get them ready before we send them out to their base school where they have a better chance to succeed. We have a lot of unfortunate stories where students come in and again, they're maybe a sophomore in high school and they're trying to make up credits already and the language barrier is a lot to overcome for them. So we think this could be a wise investment for us and for our students moving forward and make a difference, especially for our students where language is a barrier. I'm not going to go over that slide. We'll just go here. How about that? Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Dr. Reiser. That's an immense amount of information. So thank you for leading that charge and for everybody that's been working so diligently to produce this, and thank you for going through it. If board members, we will have a break in just a moment, but if anybody has any questions before Dr. Reiswick takes his seat, Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have, I think, a quick one for Mr. Dubler. At some point in the approval process for this, or after it's approved, would it be acceptable for me to offer to take board members to see the facility at Lincoln Park that is discussed in it? I assume after we approve the Esser plan, so that it wouldn't be deliberative. What I'm trying to say is, if any board member would like to go see that, I'll be glad to show you, but when it's not deliberative.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I mean, board members can go on tours of facilities as long as they're not discussing, issues at hand before the board. So yes, I mean, as long as board members aren't doing that, it wouldn't have to be public noticed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Owen. Ms. Satterfield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say I appreciate a thorough plan that is public and that we can see and that we can use as a guide to say, okay, 5 years from now, this is what we did. Did it work? And if it worked, how do we implement it within the system? Because like you said, the money will run out. So it gives us concrete evidence to say this is the roadmap of where we're going. And it does not go unnoticed the amount of work that went into developing a plan, because we can easily just get the money and just say we'll throw it at, I'm sure Russ wants to build some buildings, but but you all did the work, and I appreciate the work that went into this to create a plan so that the public can see the roadmap of where we're going. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to echo that as well. I really appreciate all the energy that has been poured into this. It was a short time frame that you all were allotted from the federal government and the state to come up with the plan. Really appreciate the attention to stakeholder feedback. The plan seems to be well-rounded to me. You know, I've asked a lot of my specific questions already in our smaller group or our one-on-one sessions about this. One of the things that I would ask for as we go on, you made the comment, Dr. Riswick, about some activities aren't going to start immediately, some of the strategies, right? They're going to come online over time. I think it would be great over time to help the board understand when certain strategies are coming online, so we have a sense of when those are beginning execution. And then also, I know that there's a lot of outcome measurement and data reporting that both the federal government is asking for and the state, but also that we're going to want to do on our own anyway to be able to understand the impact of that plan. And I think it'll be important as we move forward to be able to see some of that impact even at an iterative basis. You know, I don't think we want to wait until, you know, the end of September 2024 to kind of understand how that needle's moving. And as you mentioned before, you know, we are coming through a pandemic, and, you know, there's some belief that it might take 3 to 5 years for some of that to rebound. And I think that's okay in the sense of as long as we're thoughtful about that and we're understanding how that needle is moving as long as it's moving. And so, anyway, I just would continue to advocate for those things. And then I only have two questions. You mentioned earlier, and I know you said you're still engaged with the state on this, that if we hit a certain benchmark, I think it was 50%, there may be additional funding from the state. Do we have any sense of what that dollar amount could be or a range? I know it's not exact at this point, but what are we hearing from that?
So, good question, thank you. I don't think it's totally clear yet. So some of the things we've heard so far is like some assistance in planning.
Mm-hmm.
So like there was like a planning grant that we were eligible for $150,000. There was an additional $50,000, you know, for making a choice like that.
Right.
They've so far things have been a little more vague. They've kind of said, you know, you'll move to the top of the line for reimbursement by doing that. You'll have some additional like supports from the state on monitoring, that sort of thing. I haven't seen like an amount like, you know, hey, you'll be eligible for $5 million more if you do this or that. So I think it's probably going to be more online.
Kind of
online
in-kind
tutoring.
support?
I'm sorry.
Kind of in-kind support?
That's what it looks like based on what we've read right now. And that doesn't mean, here's my guess. My guess is at some point with the state getting their dollars too, over the course of these 3 years, they'll probably have some like granted dollars that this will put you in the front of the line, but we haven't seen like kind of like what those are yet. And so like part of that is tutoring. On their tutoring model for the all-core tutoring, and there was a lot of discussion around some of that, there are some very, they're good, but there's some very kind of stringent timelines about the percentages of kids that have to be served and this, that, and ratios to that, and a number of minutes and that kind of stuff. And so I think we're going to probably qualify for all of that, just in case you're here, because that's kind of out there. Right now, our biggest is probably going to be on ratio. Like that, the recommended ratio is 3 to 1, like in the K2 place. You know, you saw our goal was to get 150 tutors. We don't know yet. So that's what I'm saying. I would be apprehensive to accept like that part of the tutoring till we know, because what if we can only find 75? It's going to affect our ratios. I think the state will give us flexibility. We still have some calls with them on that. But so far, it looks like it's going to be kind of more in kind and probably some preferential on reimbursement, I'm guessing on future grants and that sort of thing as they bring more dollars in. We probably have some access.
Thank you. And my last question, so for those in the public who aren't as engaged in federal grant making and state level grant making and those kinds of things, I think some people can look at that $14 million of indirect cost right off the top and say, whoa, that seems a little bit strange. And I know you referenced it a little bit, but can you give a little bit more clarity about why that is pretty standard practice and what types of things those would be used for?
I may actually defer to Ron, because he does that on a regular basis. I know, again, that's something that is allowable as kind of administrative cost on almost everything we pull through, but I'll defer to him on that.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Watson. So the indirect cost is based on a percentage that's allowable with federal grants. So we take those with all federal grants. The reason this one is so large, and it's about the federal indirect cost rate, 14%, right? So, and then we would claim all of that. That would go into the general purpose budget. The thought process behind indirect cost is that there is a lot of administrative work, and there is, that goes into administering the grants and so forth. So that's kind of the premise behind an indirect, well, you know, you run a nonprofit, so you probably get all of that, but for the sake of some others, maybe they don't. So at this point, we haven't designated those funds for any particular type of spending, because one thing we recognize is that Esser dollars are one-time funds. So we have, till September of 2024. So we recognize that these funds will lapse, right? And so we want to be in a strong position when that happens, that if there are initiatives that we can continue on, that we can sustain, that we think they're worthwhile in order to sustain, we want to be in the strongest financial position we can be. So I think it's important that we continue to try to build those reserves. So absent of any designation for those funds would close into fund balance, so it would actually strengthen our reserves in the general purpose budget. So that's kind of that's the premise behind indirect cost, and it also gives the board more flexibility that if they close into general purpose and the board wants to do something with those dollars that would not be, necessarily even COVID related, the board could do that with those dollars.
What would you say to the person who would present the counter argument of, we understand there's indirect costs, but we should be spending all of this directly?
Well, we could do that.
Right.
If the board decided that, hey, we would rather, we want to take those dollars and we want to implement those for certain initiatives, the board can certainly do that. There's nothing that would stop the board from doing that. It would just be probably in the form of what I would call a fund balance designation, because any unspent funds would close into that.
Great. Thank you. I also want to just thank again publicly the Knox Ed Foundation for helping fund the planning work around this with NIET, and then also funding phase 1 and potentially phase 2 and 3 of our work with Ford NGL. I mean, it's tremendous to have a partner like that in our community who sees the value of our students and education and comes along and helps us make some things happen that would be a little bit difficult on our own, a little bit more difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. All right, I don't see any other lights on. Thank you, Dr. Reiswick. And we have 17 folks who have signed up for public forum, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll meet back here around 7:45. Thank you.
public forum, and we have 16 people in public forum. I would just like to reiterate, we've got people I know here with very different views, and that we're here to be respectful for everyone that speaks. And I hope that everyone will do that. I hope you're respectful of the board, and the board is respectful for everyone that's coming. We appreciate y'all coming, but I do want people to keep that in mind. First up is Michaela Webb. And if you can just state your name and county of residence, and then you'll have 5 minutes to speak.
Michaela Webb, 2215 Muddy Creek Lane. Members of the board, I stand here today not as a community leader, not as a recent Hardin Valley alum, but as a concerned sister of a third grader who attends an elementary school with over 1,300 students currently enrolled. I stand before the board, before the community, to ask for a mask requirement to be put in place within schools. Jefferson is the light of our family. He's always cracking jokes, participating in his class, and making friends. He is deeply loved by my family, especially since we were blessed with him after my mom lost a child in utero, right before he was born. As an 8-year-old at the time, I personally understand the pain that affects families from this, and how attending your first funeral and seeing a child-sized coffin can affect you. The death of a brother, sister, son, or daughter leaves a huge negative impact on so many people. So why are we risking the health of our children in efforts to satisfy a political divide? I know that masks have been a touchy political subject, but I'm frankly speaking to remind you that the safety of our children and their lives is not a political issue. I am deeply disappointed to hear the hatred and misinformation that folks are spreading as they try to keep masks out of schools. With the Delta variant presenting a significant threat to unvaccinated individuals, I am concerned for the safety of our students. And I'm not the only one. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, more than 4 million children have been diagnosed with COVID-19 in the United States as of July 8th, which represents 14.2% of all cases. Of that, 335 children aged 17 or younger have died. Dr. Carlos Oliveira, a pediatric infectious disease doctor and an assistant professor at Yale School of Medicine, warns of this increasing threat. Last year, for example, you would have to give a child a really high infectious dose for them to get sick. But with a virus that's more contagious, even what would be an insignificant exposure is enough to make them sick. Locally, we are experiencing these trends. As of Tuesday, 4 children are in the pediatric ICU at Children's Hospital and are sick with COVID-19. Dr. Joe Childs, the chief medical officer, warns hospitalizations for children are increasing. Even the CDC has recommended children in schools who are unvaccinated, which is those under the age of 12, should wear a mask. I'm sure you're already familiar with the specific guideline, but I will state it just to be sure. Masks should be worn indoors by all individuals aged 2 and older who are not fully vaccinated. Consistent and correct mask use by people who are not vaccinated is especially important indoors in crowded settings where physical distancing cannot be maintained. And just recently, the CDC recommended for all students, staff, and visitors to wear masks in Knox County, regardless of vaccination status. Other institutions and school systems have recognized this risk and have already taken needed action. UT and ETSU will require students to wear masks in indoor spaces, regardless of vaccination status. Hancock County schools will also require its students to wear masks starting Wednesday. If we want to avoid virtual learning and school shutdowns, we must work to ensure that everyone does their part. The flu takes out students and staff within our schools, and I know I've missed a few school days just because there's not enough to keep everybody in. So I can't even imagine the damage that the more contagious Delta variant will cause. As decision makers in the community, you must ask yourselves, how many children's lives are you willing to put on the line to simply avoid discourse or ramifications in future elections? The lives of innocents should never hang in the balance simply because of the fear of offending someone. I promise you that should a single child's life be threatened due to the board's failure to enact a mask requirement, I will be offended, parents will be offended, and the community will be outraged, and legal action will follow suit. I know firsthand the pain that comes from a brother's death, and I know that I would have done anything to prevent it. I didn't have that option then, but I do have it now. Please step up and take preventative action to save lives and to set an example. Thank you for listening, and I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Thank you. Heather Carroll. Please state your name and county of residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Heather Carroll, Knox County. I'm here today to let the board know that I am in full support of parental choice of whether or not to mask our children. Fear is more dangerous to the American people than COVID ever was, and it's time to move on. In an article written by Scott Balstisis, a PhD viral immunologist and vaccinologist who served a fellowship with the CDC studying the flu pandemic, he states the following. Fortunately, the data is clear that simply being a child provides excellent protection against serious COVID disease. Consider the CDC numbers of over 600,000 COVID U.S. deaths. 335 of those have been people under the age of 17. Adjusting for population size, the mortality rate of COVID is 99.8% lower in children. Every one of those deaths is absolutely tragic, but that number is no different from annual pediatric deaths from influenza, which numbered 251, 643, 477 in the 3 flu seasons prior to the pandemic. Those deaths are, of course, concentrated among kids with serious pre-existing conditions, so kids without those have almost zero risk. As another reference point, there are about 650 pediatric deaths in motor vehicle accidents every year. Unless your child has a high-risk medical condition, it's more dangerous for you to drive your kid to and from school than it is any variant of COVID. He goes on to say, fear has a cost. Suicides easily outnumber the COVID deaths in children under 17 who experienced waves of isolation, anxiety, and depression last year alone. 1 in 3 of our kids will meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder by adulthood. Maintaining a prolonged fear of state is unhealthy for them, and it's unhealthy for us too. It is not possible to say that masking, social distancing, and quarantines are necessary for our safety and not incur the adverse consequences. Like these and not to mention, learning loss is a real harm to our children as well. All this because we won't trumpet the great news that no COVID variant is more dangerous to children or vaccinated adults more than the flu. But let's put things in perspective for Knox County. Currently, we have 1,420 active cases, which comes out to 0.002% of the Knox County population. But let's break it down even further. According to the Tennessee Department of Health, there are 97,000 children in Knox County under the age of 17. Their total number of cases is 6,522. 0.06%. Their hospitalizations make up 0.4%, and their death toll here in Knox County is 0. With 609,000 residents in Knox County, we have had a total of 52,000 cases, 1,400 hospitalizations, and 655 deaths. That makes the death rate in Knox County 1.25%, with 0 of those being children. It is a myth that masks prevent viruses. The evidence is clear. There is literally no evidence that supports that masks help to protect our children from COVID or any other virus. Did you know the size of a COVID particle is 0.01 micron? That's also the same size as a flu particle. And did you know that the standard cloth mask, bandana, and face covering is 200 to 1,000 times the size of a COVID particle? Wearing a mask to prevent COVID is like throwing sand at a chain link fence and expecting it not to get through. Evidence actually shows that face coverings increase illness. In fact, bacteria, which is 50 times larger than COVID particles, remain trapped inside of a mask. Thus, virus particles may enter into the mask, but the bacteria may not go out, resulting in the wearer consistently being exposed to their own bacteria, which causes a whole host of other health problems. All parties that would mandate the use of face coverings for children are not only willfully ignoring established science, but are willfully engaging in a clinical experiment on children, my children. Agencies such as the Tennessee Department of Health and the CDC and the information they have provided on the matter of COVID has been scientific opinion. They are not using facts to create their guidelines and protocols. If it were so, they would repeatedly show the truth that children are not the drivers of this virus. It is well established that kids have statistically zero chance of dying from COVID. I cannot overstate that point enough. Zero. CDC website shows that K through 12 mortality rate is 0.0003%. Furthermore, the mask mandates in our school have posed a major threat on our children's development. It ignores the essential needs of a growing child. The well-being of our children and young people is highly dependent on the emotional connection with others, and masks create an unsafe barrier and makes emotional connection very difficult. I hope these clear and scientific facts that I've laid out to this board will help you keep the plan that's in place to make it a parental choice whether or not to send our children with a mask. Thank you.
Kim Sprague. If you'll just state your name and county of residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Yeah, Kim Sprague, Knox County. I'm here as a Knox County parent of students in the schools. My professional history as an LCSW is over 30 years as a mental health provider, including in the school systems. I wanted to come today. I appreciate all the work you guys have done and your sacrifice. I wanted to come to make sure that while you're hearing a lot of medical information, that you don't lose sight of the mental health impact that masks have on children. We've talked in the past about ACEs. We've talked about the cortisol and the fear, the hormones that come up with fear. And that really impacts kids in their ability to learn, their perceptions, and during these developmental years can lead to feeling a sense of hopelessness that will carry with them throughout their lifespan. And so, as somebody has mentioned, we've seen an increase in suicides, we've seen an increase in mental health diagnoses such as anxiety and depression during this pandemic. And so I want you guys to just be mindful that by putting masks on kids, they're not able to really weigh out the pros and cons and all this other stuff we're talking about. To them, it just feels like people are gonna die and they're scared. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. Additionally, social cueing is greatly hindered when we have masks. Superintendent, you had, sorry to point out, people may have issues such as they're hard of hearing, but they may have other issues that cause them to need facial expression, to be able to read people's facial expressions to get the full message of what they're saying. And when we mask people, they're not able to really read what is that person thinking, what's their expression. And particularly with kids with autism and other issues, that may hinder their ability to regulate their own emotions when they can't see and read everybody else's emotions. So I just want to make sure that I pointed that out. The governor mentioned in this past week TCAP scores. And we saw a decline in scores, and that was expected, particularly with kids who were doing virtual learning. But it was interesting to me that those scores were also declined for kids who were doing in-school learning. And I had to wonder, if they were in school, why did their scores decline? Was there a fear factor? Was it the masks? I don't know that we could really tease that out, but it's food for thought, and I just wanted you guys to consider that. Lastly, and because it was brought up, I feel like there's this pressure to get vaccinated, Why was the vaccine created? It was created to develop antibodies to COVID within your body, right? We wanted to hurry and get those antibodies in people. Well, if you've had COVID, you have the antibodies. And the data is showing that the natural antibodies for people who have had COVID is actually stronger than those created by the vaccine. Hence the many breakthroughs from people who have had the vaccine and are still getting COVID. The data out there, it's not exactly clear, but most people have had COVID. The majority of people have had COVID. We know that many people who get it, up to 40%, maybe never even have symptoms. That was the case in my household, but when we tell somebody to go get vaccinated without knowing their health history, especially because this is an experimental vaccine that can be damaging, and the research I'm reading is that if you've had COVID and get the vaccine, it can be even more likely that you'll have life-threatening side effects from the vaccine. There's just too much we don't know, and I think unless you're somebody's medical provider and know their medical history, it's really out of scope to suggest that they get a vaccine. And so I would just caution people in a position of leadership to encourage the vaccine if that's out of your scope to do so. And I yield the rest of my time. I thank you guys for your service.
Thank you, Deborah Howard.
Deborah Howard, Knox County. Is that good? Could you hear me? Okay, I'm kind of short. So I'm going to be short and sweet. I want to say thank you to those of you who are supportive of the choice to not wear a mask or to wear a mask. So I'm a PA in the county, and you know I'm not a CDC person. I'm not a Tennessee Department of Health person. I'm none of that. But this is a virus. It's peaking at the same time as it did last year. It's going to probably fall precipitously the same way it did last year. It doesn't really have anything to do with the mask or without a mask. Just doesn't have anything to do with it. Every adult who wishes to have had the vaccine has had the opportunity, plenty of opportunity to get the vaccine. So there shouldn't be any question there. Not a single person needs to worry about anyone else's decision to wear a mask, not wear a mask, get a vaccine, not get a vaccine. It's nobody else's business but that individual person. So I just, again, want to say thank you to those of you who, know that it should be a choice. None of the optional mask proponents care if anyone else wears a mask. I don't think you'll have any problem with anyone who sees somebody wearing a mask, like making fun of them or doing anything like that. We don't care if you do or don't take a vaccine. All we've wanted throughout the last year has just been to be provided the choice. And I think that's what you've done. And I think that's fantastic. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jessica Wright. And if you'll state your name and county of residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Yes. My name is Jessica Wright. I'm in Knox County. I can get started if you want. Okay. I have children, obviously, in the Knox County school system. One is eligible for the 12 and over vaccine and has received it. And another one does not have a vaccine available for them because they are under 12. So I am concerned. So one of the missions of the Knox County School Board is to provide an accessible learning environment. And children under 12 do not have access to a COVID-19 vaccine right now. Reports say that they're expected after school starts, some saying in September, some saying in October, maybe midwinter. Nobody really knows, but we just know that it's coming. As our children's parents, caretakers, and school community, our kids trust us to lead them into safe and accessible learning. They trust us with their well-being. And currently, with the understanding, right now as it stands, that there's no mask mandate, no temperature check, and no contact tracing, that we're allowing a known harm, COVID-19 and its variants, to further adapt and overcome to our most vulnerable, our children who are growing into the next leaders and decision makers of our county and of our nation. COVID-19 is devastating among children and adults. The effects, short and long term, are real. Whether you've had symptoms or not, they are real. Hospitalizations of children due to COVID-19 are increasing, with some cases being fatal. In the U.S., cases among teens and children have gone up 84% this week alone. Cases locally and nationally are rising and will continue to rise if precautions are not put in place. The Delta variant has been found to be as contagious as the chickenpox. Parents entrust the school board and the schools with the safety of their children while in school. That trust is broken when COVID-19 cases are no longer being communicated, and the COVID dashboard no longer shows data from October 2020 to now. I tried to get the numbers today, and I only got August and September of last year. Our county vaccination rate is not high enough for herd immunity, and COVID is still a danger to our community and to children unable or yet ineligible for a vaccine, as well as those with pre-existing conditions and autoimmune diseases. To keep our children safe and provide them the best learning opportunities, we must adapt and overcome to this virus by listening to the American Academy of Pediatrics and re-implementing school actions from last year. Wear a mask, provide temp checks, provide contact tracing. These are 3 simple steps to keep our vulnerable children safe from a devastating virus while continuing to provide excellent, accessible learning. However, if these precautions aren't available or are not decided upon, then please provide more options. Virtual school is one option, and it has been provided, and thank you. But can students who go virtual or homeschool for the fall return for in-person in the spring? Can you offer separate rooms or teaching environments for those who want to wear a mask? The virus is adapting among the unvaccinated, and we need to adapt and overcome that. And again, UT this week issued mask wear mandates for those in the classroom and indoor events, following the CDC guidelines. I think it's important for us to, and I know that we are, trying to keep ahead of all the information that is coming out. And there is a lot of information coming out. But again, this virus has been adapting, and it is proliferating among the unvaccinated. Viruses want to live, and they will change how they work to extend that. And we need to change how we're precautioning ourselves and taking care of our community and our most vulnerable. Thank you.
Eric Richter.
Can you hear me okay? I was going to shorten what I said, what I was planning to say, because it's already been covered. But because my youngest daughter can't get vaccinated and our family has continued to wear masks in public, even when restrictions are lifted. We've successfully kept the virus out of our home and have no intention of letting it enter, and that is why we're requiring both our in-school students to wear a mask while in school. But based on what we've experienced from those in the public, as well as friends, and even members of our own family, we're concerned about them being harassed, bullied, or made to feel uncomfortable because they're doing something their parents are requiring them to do. I know they have a choice to take the mask off when they leave our site, but we're hoping they will make the right choice. But doing the right thing is a lot harder to make when you've got someone making fun of you for that choice or pressuring you to choose other options. I'm being perfectly honest when I say my kids know without confusion how I feel about not being vaccinated and not wearing masks indoors in public. They hear it daily. However, they also know that giving their friends a hard time about choosing not to be vaccinated and not wearing masks in public, or any other choice they make about themselves, whether it be hairstyle, clothes, religion, or politics, is not okay and won't be tolerated in our family. However, I seriously doubt that every parent feels this way or has the same policy that we do. Even though we realize there's a possibility that unmasked students might face ridicule as well, based on the fact that less than 40% of those eligible for vaccination are vaccinated in Tennessee, and along with the number of people I see in stores not wearing masks, my children and others like them are much more likely to be subject to scorn and ridicule. Parents would like very much to know what policies will be in place to make sure our children aren't subjected to harassment for wearing masks. Also, will it be acceptable for teachers who can't understand our masked students to ask them to remove or pull their mask down while speaking? This happened many times last year. My wife and I, along with what I assume are hundreds of other parents, are well aware that kids will be subjected to conflicting information and harassing behavior this school year, and I realize it's kind of late to implement something day one, especially since day one is Monday or tomorrow if students are attending orientation. Will it inevitably, when it inevitably does, what will be done to support our children? Or will it be the parents' sole responsibility to make our children feel like they're not doing anything wrong? Thank you.
Thank you. Logan Taylor.
Good evening, Superintendent Thomas and board members. You may remember me. My name is Logan, and I am a member of the Halls High School Madrigals group. I came before you 6 months ago in the hopes of being given a choice to unmask for our school's spring musical. Unfortunately, this did not happen. The only time in the entire 2020 to 21 school year that our madrigals performed without masks was at the Halls High School graduation on June 1st, and this happened only because the mandates ended on the last day of school in May. And I don't know about any other students, but I know personally that it has been such a relief this summer to be free of a mask and reconnect with my friends, see the joy and laughter on their faces. I mean, come on. It's been a blessing. And last week, our school had Red Devil Day at Halls High School, where we paid fees and picked up our Chromebooks. And mind you, this was the first time in 12 months that we'd been able to go into our own school without masks, no restrictions required, no temperature checks. And I've got to say, it was amazing to see all of the students' faces that I hadn't got to see in a year. And I am respectfully asking each one of you, please do not force me or my classmates to wear masks again this school year. If there are students or other teachers or others who prefer or need to be masked, the option should be available to them. However, mandating mask wearing for all is unnecessary and detrimental to our overall health and well-being. I have expressed to my parents that I do not want to return to school in mask. Even though this is my junior year, I am willing to be homeschooled and transfer to a private school in order to avoid masking. Please, do not force me to make this choice by forcing me to wear a mask. Thank you.
Darren Antle. If you'll state your name and county of residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Darren Antle, Knox County. You know, the funny thing is I had a lot of notes written down in preparation for tonight, but obviously things change as things have changed over the last year plus. I just want to thank Superintendent Thomas, Madam Chair, and the rest of the board for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm definitely in favor of masks being an option. Education is very important to me and my family. My wife is an elementary school teacher here in Knox County. I have a rising second grader and 2 other children that will be in the school system in years to come. You know, the thing that I think about with my rising second grader is the fact that this will be her 3rd year in Knox County schools, and she has yet to be on a school field trip. She has yet to have the opportunity to socially interact with anyone other than what's in her core class. That's just not even anyone else in her school, but also anyone else, and even in her grade, there's been that separation. And as many people have mentioned here already tonight, that has many impacts and factors that play into their mental well-being, their education, everything else, that it's not a positive thing to isolate the children, even if they're in their own class. And speaking with the masks, even my wife has mentioned that she teaches a younger grade. It's very difficult for her to even instruct when the students can't, when they're learning to vocalize words, learn how to speak in sentences, that they need to be able to mimic what the teacher is saying, how to work their mouths, how to speak. This is all vitally important. No wonder our test scores are down. I can't really speak to statistics because with my profession, I've been trained, I only speak to what I know. That's why I can't say anything for the rest of Knox County. I can't say anything for the rest of the state of Tennessee. I can't say anything for on the federal level. What I know is, in my family, that the masks are a serious detriment to the well-being of my daughter's education, my wife being able to do her profession as an educator here in Knox County. And so all I'm saying is, I'm definitely in favor of having the masks being an option. If someone wants to send their child to the school and they're fearful of that, they can wear a mask. We're not saying you can't wear a mask. It's allowable, permittable, recommended. We went through that discussion earlier. The fact is that it's a recommendation. That means you can if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. It's no different than wearing pants or wearing shorts or anything else. It's a personal preference. It's a family preference to some. Not only that, if they don't want to send their children to the school to begin with, you've created a virtual school system. And the one stat I will say is that as I looked up, I'm pretty sure, I think it's less than half of the capacity of that virtual school has been enrolled at this point. So in my mind, when someone says, oh, I'm fearful of the safety of our schools, you as a school board provided an option for those people that are fearful of sending their children to school, and you can't even reach half the capacity. If that was such a big ordeal of, I don't want to send my kid to school, you've provided a way to do that, and they're not even taking advantage of that. So I think moving forward, rather than having a mask mandate, then I think you just provide the option, as you have, for individual families to allow to do whatever they want to do. And these kids, educators, everyone involved in Knox County School will have a great school year and safe school year for the rest of this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Helena Rago. And if you'll please state your name and county of residence. And you have 5 minutes to speak.
Good evening. My name is Helena Rago, and I'm a resident of the 4th District in Knox County. I'm a mother, wife, and a small business owner. My husband and I moved to Knoxville for many reasons, but raising a family and the school system was a deciding factor. Overall, we've had amazing teachers, principals, and schools in the 8 years here, and for that we are thankful. I offer my gratitude and appreciation to all the parents, teachers, staff, administration, the Board of Education, and the Superintendent for navigating us through what nobody has ever experienced before. We were all in unknown territory, but that is simply not the case anymore. We have enough data and, frankly, common sense to proceed into the next school year. It is my understanding that the purpose here today, or one of the purposes here today, was, quote, discussion and possible action regarding the board and superintendent's authority concerning the implementation of public health protocols as it relates to the superintendent's KCS Connect 21-22 plan approved on April 14th, 2021. There's one thing that's for certain. I do not want to co-parent my children with the government, respectfully. My husband and I will advocate for our children's health. We will not give up our medical freedoms, and we will choose what is best for our family. One thing I could think of that everybody can agree on is that for far too long, too many people have ignored politics. We've been passive through the years. You, as our representatives, I'm pleading with you not to hope that we are passive again and create pathways here today that takes away our rights as parents. At the end of the last school year, regardless of what was going on in this room, we, the parents, were led to believe that the mask policies would be ending with the school year. Virtual schools were being created for those who wished to attend virtually, and we would return to normal with the exception of an optional mask for those who chose to wear it. Children attended summer school programs with no issues without masks. We watched KCS post on various social media accounts of all summer of students and teachers without masks. Teachers meeting and training without masks. The newest teachers prepping for their first school year without masks. I said numerous times that I expected something to happen last minute, that our children would be used in this game of politics. There is an election this month after all, and I'm sick of being proven right. I'm here to advocate for my children, not from a place of fear or paranoia, but from a place of understanding, reason, fact, and science. Over the last 18 months, policies have been implemented based on fear of the unknown, and they have been detrimental to our children. They've resulted in suicide rates in children going up, child exploitation rates going up, child abuse cases being underreported but yet skyrocketing. TCAP scores are down. Our children's test scores are down. And our county has 0 adolescent deaths. At what cost do we protect our children from COVID? We are constantly hearing things that increase panic with no explanation, data, or proof. The media headlines are 108% COVID increase in Knox, 200% COVID increase in Knox. Yet per the Knox County COVID case count data, there hasn't been a percent change day over day of more than 0.22%, except for back in April due to a backlog. We currently have 14 people in the hospital and only 2 in the ICU. I hope they all have a speedy recovery, but it's time that we face reality. We have learned about overreporting in numbers, comorbidities, one test for COVID being recalled, and another being stripped of its emergency use authorization because it's unreliable and cannot differentiate between COVID and the flu. Those are the CDC's words, not mine. We know how COVID is transmitted now and that cloth face masks don't work. We hear the president's transition advisor on CNN saying, quote, "Many of the face cloth coverings that people wear are not very effective." We acknowledge that there's dirty science out there that does suggest that they do. We know that they're studying larger particles and ignoring gaps in masks. Why is that important? Because we are talking about our children. Children who ask their friends to hold their mask. They're touching their mask. Kids that are playing with their masks, biting on them, dropping them on the floor and wearing them to the bathroom. We know that children's masks were found to be contaminated with bacteria, parasites, and fungi, including dangerous pathogens and pneumonia-causing bacteria. We have a virtual school option, and we have a mask option. Please don't let our kids start school as normal and then tear away their hopes, excitements, and ambitions to them. I've emailed you all links that back up the data that I've spoke about today. I thank you for your time and for your service.
Thank you. Joe Lynch. Is Joe Lynch here? Okay. Debbie Stafford. Michael Lett.
My name is...
Oh, sorry, state your name and county residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
My name is Michael Lett, and I'm a resident of Knox County. I came today, I wrote each of you, out of deep concern for a topic that we all wish would go away. I really don't want a mask in a school. And if we can do other stuff like we did last year without masks and achieve the same results, I believe that's exactly what we should do. I spoke earlier today with a board member, and we don't know if it was the mask or social distancing or increased efforts in sanitation and janitorial services or temperature checks. We know that we got good results last year. Well, maybe not roll all of those things back this year. Maybe continue with social distancing in the classroom. We know that that's a pretty effective one overall. But I really, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, going off script with what I wanted to say, but ultimately I don't want a mask in a school. There are some members of the community who have politicized this as a Democratic or Republican issue. I believe it's very sad for us as a school system because you're elected as a board. You're elected as a board almost as a company, not as a political leg. Item mentions in the prior board sessions include that children are not affected and children don't spread COVID. Unfortunately, that information is evolving just as the virus is evolving. The CDC, Harvard Medical School, and other resources have studied the effects, and while initial data concluded that children were less likely to spread the disease, more recent studies, as we all get more data, have shown that the viral load in the upper respiratory systems does not correlate to the severity of symptoms, and these children are just as likely to spread the virus. Between July 12th and August 3rd, the number of children 5 to 18 that have tested positive increased from 864 to 4,025 in Tennessee. These are children that can infect their parents and their grandparents. That's why I'm here. I'm the father of a 5th grader, not eligible to get vaccinated yet. I'm the husband of my wife. I have an elderly parent who is vaccinated as well, and I'm a friend of many. And what I do is out of compassion for others. I wear a mask. I do everything I should out of compassion for others. And it hurts me to the core when other people don't want to have that same compassion. It hurts my son to the core. Recently, my wife was exposed even after she was vaccinated. She didn't have to quarantine. She quarantined for 7 days while we tried to understand if she was, because we wanted to protect those around her. My son and I quarantined at the other end of the house away from her. She tested positive, not having any symptoms, so we had to quarantine another 10 days away from her. After 17 days, my son hugged his mom and broke down crying. That's a mental effect. That's a mental effect of people not wearing masks. It's a mental effect of people not getting vaccinated. And like some of the board had said, just get the damn vaccine. Let us as a community go on. It's those that aren't vaccinating that are putting others at risk as the virus evolves. Our county mayor has said, follow the rules of schools, or not schools, follow the rules of companies. If you walk into Walmart, if you walk into Costco, if you walk into Target, their signs say, if you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. At Knoxville's rates, you should see 50% of the people in that store in masks. You don't. We can't follow rules as a society. That's why at a school district, we can protect those children that can infect others. We've seen that, and we need to do that. If it's not with masks, do it with other means. Do it with social distancing. Have different classrooms, as someone stated earlier. Just please work for the betterment of our children, our community, and our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Wright. Stephanie Kodich.
Hi there, Stephanie Kodish, Knox County. Knox County Board of Education and Superintendent Thomas, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a mother of 3, and my eldest son is 13, going into 8th grade at Bearden Middle School. He is vaccinated. I have 2 younger kids, 8 and 10. They are not yet eligible to be vaccinated. I worry for my whole family and for our community, realizing that we are in uncertain times, that COVID has placed loss and stress on kids and adults alike, and that there are certain measures that science tells us will better our chances of staying healthy and hopefully making COVID a thing of the past. My eldest son has spent more of his middle school career in virtual learning than he has in person, and my family based our decision to send him back to in-person learning because we followed the evolving directives of the Knox County Board of Education and the commendable leadership of Principal Michael Toth. We felt confident that the board would rely on recommendations from the medical community in determining policies to ensure my son and all of our children and staff operate in as safe an environment as possible. This confidence comes from the policies that you have set, specifically your decision to adhere to the Tennessee Department of Health COVID recommendations in a reopening plan, which I will add was not contingent on a state of emergency. And a reopening plan is due that's different. Last year, the school population was split. Many students did virtual learning, and relative social distancing was a byproduct of less students at school and intentional efforts. Many measures were in place, including temperature readings at drop-off and mask wearing, and our community took some comfort in the relative success of a rather limited number of COVID cases at Bearden. But past is not precedent. Now, we start a new school year with many more students back in in-person learning and a more contagious COVID variant and misinformation and communication that is at odds with the recommendation of health professionals as well as previous board decisions on COVID policy. No one will die from wearing a mask or having their temperature taken, but that's not what I'm advocating. I'm just asking that you follow the wisdom of the health community and not decide otherwise. We need to come together and we need to be proactive and we need to heed the recommendation of those health professionals. As board members, you each have an obligation to uphold your duties and to ensure a safe learning environment for our kids. As representatives of our community, you have a responsibility to represent us all, and that includes the most vulnerable among us. And as leaders in our community, we look to you to make decisions that are just, with care for our children as your North Star. I am grateful to you all for your leadership. Over the last year and a half, you have done commendable work. You have had a heavy burden. You're a group of people charged with decision-making that affects a significant population of our children that cannot get COVID vaccinations. While some have sought to make public health and safety a political issue, science, fact, and data have rightfully shaped decisions for Knox County schools, and this must continue. In your collective wisdom, you voted on the expertise and recommendations of the medical community in addressing COVID and in determining a reopening plan. That's my understanding. As of Friday, a community petition opened, and as of this meeting, over 1,525 signatures are urging you to follow the Tennessee Department of Health COVID recommendations in a school reopening plan. I submitted this to you, this petition, along with 400 less signatures earlier this morning with that list, as well as a set of comments. And I'm going to try to really quickly speed through a couple of those comments that I just want to lift up to give voice to them. Children, and these are not my words, these are the words of other commenters. Kim Wilson Owen, children have no say or rights. It is up to us to keep them safe. Teachers deserve better. Hannah Kincaid, Knox County cases are on the rise, up 264% in the last 2 weeks. If the goal is to stay open, keep our kids and community safe, we must do something. Melissa Kreger, I want my 2 small children to be safe in elementary school, and I also want to help end this pandemic. Erin Morgan, I am a mom and a physician, and I trust science. Kids are vulnerable to COVID, and those less than 12 haven't had the chance to be vaccinated. Please listen to the AAP and the CDC and every medical society that recommends vaccination and now masking with this new variant spreading so readily. I don't have enough time to read anymore, but I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Joshua Peterson? Is Joshua Peterson here? Okay, Barry Rosen? If you'll please state your name and county of residence, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Barry Rosen, Knox County. I am here to make you aware of what happened at Oak Ridge yesterday. I am a landlord. I got a call from I called my tenant up to do some work on it. She says I cannot come over because her daughter caught COVID at school. This is Willowbrook Elementary. 2 other kids in her classroom caught COVID. She's a parent that is autoimmune, and she says, I took my shot, we'll see what happens. If I get COVID, I am dead. If my wife gets COVID, she is dead. My son will be alone. I'm trying to get my son into virtual school right now. He was accepted at L&N Academy. They told me at the beginning of the year that he could not go virtual because it's L&N. It's the special school. And the last 2 weeks have changed. I started thinking about it, and now I want to get him in virtual school. Or I am going to take him out of school and homeschool him. I can afford it. Other parents can't afford this. I mean, you know, what my tenant told me is very scary. And then she went out. Today I went over there again. And her boyfriend was driving around town with no mask on. How do I know if one of these kids get COVID that their parents aren't going to drive around and give COVID to everybody else? We don't know what's going on with other families. I'm protecting myself, but they're not protecting themselves. And I'm putting myself at risk. And I'm just hoping, you know, that I can get virtual for my student before it's too late, because I don't want him to go to school and have that risk. It's just too scary for me that I'll die. I don't want to die. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very
And
much.
I have the phone number of the people. Any media that wants to talk to them, I called up all the media, and the only one that talked to the person was Knox County News. No other TV, no radio station called her. So, and if anybody wants her phone number, she says she will talk to the media, but she can't come here because she's got COVID.
Okay, thank you. That concludes public forum.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. The Okay, do we have comments for public forum? Anything from Mr. Jen? I'm sorry, board forum, Mr. Jen.
I guess I would just want to say, since we do go back to school next Monday, I hope all students, are excited to get back to school, get back to learning. I know this past year has been a very difficult one for many, whether you've been in person with masks or you had to go through virtual, and I know many who have suffered through that. I guess I also want to remind students to, just be conscientious of others around you, be compassionate, please, There might have to do the right thing, and that right thing might be the hard thing, but I think you can make that choice, so.
Thank you, Mr. Jen. Ms. Satterfield?
Thank you. I just want to give a big shout out to Russ Oaks and his team for doing overtime on getting our schools open and getting ready, and a special recognition for making sure Austin East is good to go for the doors open. So thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. I agree with that one also. Ms. Owen, Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to draw our attention to all the really incredible work we've heard the last 2 weeks, again, from some of the things we're trying to do around Esser and Ford NGL. There's a lot to be really encouraged about and positive about in Knox County schools. And my hope is that discussion related to our COVID protocols and earlier votes does not detract from that. At the same time, as a board, not only are we trying to address the academic health of our students, we're also trying to address their physical and mental health as well. So I appreciate the dialogue and the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Babb? Ms. Henderson?
I just want to say, as a parent, I'm excited for all the kids, teachers to return to school next week. I'm excited for them. I hope everybody has a great start to the school year. And the past couple weeks, I've been, as a board member, excited to hear about some student achievement initiatives that everyone's working on. I feel very encouraged about that, and thank you to the staff, KEF, and everybody for working on that for our students.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Ms. Bounds?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The mention a minute ago, I just thought I had this information as of 5 o'clock, and I just thought the board needed to know, and it kind of reiterates what we've talked about and Ms. Babb said about how it breaks down. But the petition that was started several days ago for masking had 1,427 signatures. The one for not masking started a couple of days later than that and had 900. And if you factor in the petition 3 months ago, it had 1,795. So it looks like a breakdown of like 2,695 to 1,427 if you combine those two. But otherwise, it's just about the same. So I just wanted the board to be aware that, again, the community is very divided, but if you're not following the signatures, they're pretty identical.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Christie? All right. I would just like to say I attended the school, I'm sorry, it's getting late and my brain is going again. The school security officer graduation, we celebrated the 2020 graduates and the 2021 graduates a few days ago, and that was great to be able to be there and graduate and celebrate those graduations, and we appreciate our officers and just all of our staff and teachers as everybody goes back to school. Thank you for all the hard work, and I hope everybody has a great start to the school year next week. We are adjourned. Thank you.